All right, everybody, it's Detroit Gamesters, episode 2. This is Shamir, and I'm with my buddy Arjun, and we're going to get right into it. It's the start of the year, so I thought we'd start off with some hot news topics. So I think the thing that is getting everyone's attention right now is CES, talking about all the different brands and what they're really bringing to the
Pretty exciting.
forefront. And yeah, Arjun, did you get a chance to check out any of the CES stuff?
Not completely. I know that Nvidia announced a couple of their new product lineup with the 50 series. Obviously, some stuff with Lenovo and their Legion handheld mobile device.
Yeah, so maybe we'll start off with Nvidia. Did you see the trailer at all for the new graphics? Man, it was pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like every time in Nvidia like has to present anything, like they know exactly how to present it. They come
Did,
up with some slick gameplay, demo, and I swear in all these years we've never seen anything that looks like any of their
yeah, never
gameplay
gets
demos.
anywhere really close to it. But was it a specific game in development or like a demo? Was it
Oh,
a
I forgot the
prototype?
name. It did have a name to it, but it was essentially like a third-person shooter, and there was just
Really?
amazing particle threats, like amazing lighting. Like it really looked amazing.
So, what's the new key feature of the 50 series that compared to the 40 and 30 series? Was it the multi-frame generation for
I
DLSS? Was
think that
it
was like one of the big stories, definitely. You're getting more and more frames that are generated from the AI. And, at this point, it's just kind of ridiculous what they're claiming. I think everyone online has been seeing, you can get a 4090, and a 5070 now, which is
pretty
basically a
crazy?
quarter of the price. I think it's a third of the price, which is probably going to piss off all of the people who have a 4090.
Exactly. And you're going to destroy the market, the used market now for 4090s. That's
Exactly.
another thing. It's going to tank the prices. And then in terms of supply chain, how many of these things are they going to actually be able to sell? Because as usual, scalpers pick these up really quickly, online only. You either have to be a member of Best Buy's paid membership or something else for you to even get it, which most people aren't. So I just feel like,
I feel like we're rolling right back into those days.
yeah,
But
scalping days. And
the
it's
thing
like,
is with NVIDIA, like, I don't know, their strategy is definitely working. And I think they are giving gamers like a sizable increase generation after generation. But I feel like it's kind of leaving a bad taste in a lot of gamers' mouths because, for every generation now, like, 3000 series, now 4000, now 5000, they always make DLS such a headlining feature and
yeah.
they bring a new generation in it and they're like, oh, yeah, well, too bad it's not coming to the prior generation. And then they're throwing out some insane numbers. I really wonder why can't they just bring DLSS forward to the
Well,
older
that's
generations?
part of their whole marketing pitch, and the way they generate a lot of revenue is honestly they gatekeep the feature now to their latest hardware, which generates a lot of interest, and then so many people try to buy it and then they sell out and they go, we're going to do it
Yeah.
all over again. And what's the cadence or frequency of how often they release a new
I
generation
think
of
they've been doing it
graphics?
about every 2 years, and this time it's been
So
three
insane.
years, but they've been keeping it up, and he's pretty much just backed out of the high end market, so they really have no competition when it comes to the 5090, the 5080. So they can charge what they want, they can do what they want at this
Yeah.
point, and people are gonna suck it up.
And that's funny because AMD just, I think, also announced their new lineup
Yeah,
of GPUs. And even though it looks promising, like just knowing, like you said, that the 5070 is as cheap as it is, like everyone's not going to care. This kind of
yeah.
just supersedes all that. And I think, again, you're getting into that territory of like potentially diminishing returns with this. Maybe not. Like, the iPhone, like Apple releases a new fine iPhone every year. And you
People
go,
gobble it up.
yep. And they still go, and that's with very minimal changes. You look at this every 2 years, if you're getting
I
massive
mean, it's
changes
pretty
like that,
sizable.
did they show a comparison of the current gen to previous gen, saying this is the
Yeah.
numbers? Okay, and what
They
was it?
pretty
Was it
much
like?
always do. I mean, at this point, I don't know the graphs off the top of my head.
But was it like
I'm not the biggest
fifty
PC gamer.
percent
It
increase?
looked like it was for some games they were trying to say double, but then
That's
there
insane.
was a couple of slides where they were showing. I think it was off the 5070 or the 5080, and they were showing games without the DLSS frame generation, and you were still getting like 20% improvement. So, and for the same price or cheaper. So across the board, these graphics cards are way better. I think Nvidia could have made it way more expensive, but they didn't. But at the same point, at the same time, like I just I can't help but feel a little annoyed at the fact that they're just gatekeeping everything to every
Yeah.
generation. Even if I wanted to get a 4090 and now the price is going to drop like crazy, like in the back of my mind, I'm always going to think, man, that newest version of DLSS is just killing it.
Part of it too is based on the hardware, the MLAI hardware. Some of it's absolutely needed to support this new generation of DLSS. I'm assuming they're calling it DLSS 4. Is that what they're calling it? So some of it, it's warranted. But like, at what point do we say, can we backroll some of these changes to previous generations of hardware? And I feel
Yeah.
like maybe there
If
is
they
a way to
wanted to,
do
they
it.
could find a
I
way.
feel like they could, and it's like you don't have to release it this
Or
often.
they can build from the ground up, keeping backwards compatibility in mind.
Yeah, to some extent. And again, it's not going to always be possible, right? When you start to push the boundaries, you do need new hardware. That's why they upgrade some of those GPUs to say you can only do it on this generation. But still, I'm look. I've been excited for a long time about PC gaming, and it took me a while to get into it from consoles. But at a certain point, I go, this is so overwhelming. I don't want a really PC game because there's too much hardware out there, and
Yeah.
it's like too much variety, too much choice. And I'm like, I just want a console that I can pay for and run
It's
some
just kind of
decently good.
straightforward.
Yeah,
I
straightforward.
feel like, especially when you get older, like, it's just so much more straightforward. You don't have to worry about updates. You don't have to worry about compatibility and things like that. And of course, you're getting the best performance on PC. But I think, and this kind of segues into the next thing we want to talk about, especially with the rise of handheld gaming. You've heard this from me for a long time. I've really been wanting a 5090, but now that I have a Asus ROG Ally, I kind
Yeah.
of don't have that same desire now
Yeah.
to get a 5090. Because
Because graphics aren't the most important thing to you anymore. And here's the crazier thing: if you look at it, the fact that Nintendo, who partners with Nvidia to have custom hardware and a custom SoC, they're going to potentially now have AI upscaling in their next product,
I didn't even
which
think
is
about that
huge.
actually.
And they're doing it. There's a specific patent that just came out that was made public to reduce the size of their games on their carts because their cartridges can only support maybe 60 gigs, maybe 30 gigs. And they're going to be able to use this to downscale the input to maybe 540p, but you can still support 1080p games, and you reduce the file size by almost 50 to 100%. And it's so smart
I
and
mean,
it's so
that's going to be a
genius.
huge game changer. And right now, you're not going to, I mean, I don't see the PS5 or the Xbox being able to use that same
Yeah,
technology, right? Because their chips are outdated. So it's kind of ironic that they're going to have to wait until the next generation to
yeah,
really get more AI on board. And meanwhile, Nintendo Switch 2 can, profit off of that right off the get go.
yeah. It's kind of crazy, honestly. Like, I know we haven't got the official unveil of the Nintendo Switch 2, and I'm super excited for it, like any moment. But the fact that they're incorporating that in some fashion makes me super excited because, again, not only do I get to portably game, I get to get a decent looking image from Nintendo, who's never prioritized that ever for any of their goddamn games, including Breath of the Wild, things that barely run, on their in portable mode. And people have emulated those games on PC at 4K
Yeah.
60,
And they're looking so good.
and they look so damn good. And it's like, just give me something that runs stable. And I think, again, going forward now into the next generation of consoles, whether it's
Yeah.
Xbox, 2026, 2027, or Nintendo or PS5, we just have different things to look forward to. And it's not going to be graphics anymore.
I mean, I'm loving that resurgence in like handheld gaming. I did doubt Steam Deck a little bit when it came out, but it really has shifted the game a lot. And now
Mm.
you have other manufacturers that are going to be working with Steam, like Lenovo, to bring Steam, powered
Yeah.
devices. And so, you see that market growing. You see Xbox trying to get in. You see PlayStation trying to get
Yeah.
in. You see Nintendo really just killing it where it's at right now. And so, that's a good argument to have, graphics versus portability and
Yeah.
comfort, because of course we all want the most amazing looking experience, but if we're on the go and we just can't find the time to do it, handheld gaming really is a great way.
Yeah, well, the numbers speak for itself too. Nintendo just surpassed the PS2 in the US as the most sold console, and it's sitting at over 150 million. And you think about it this way: Nintendo has its brand specifically, its own IP that sold that system at 150 million without games looking well. Now, think about what Nvidia is doing for it. You're now going to get so many third-party games ported over to the Switch 2 way more than the last generation. Dude, I think it's going to surpass 150 million. I think we're gonna get closer to that 200 million mark. Like, dude,
That'd be
like,
insane.
imagine playing now Call of Duty. Imagine playing
I
Oblivion,
know Microsoft's
Skyrim.
trying to do that,
Dude,
so
I'm telling you, all on Nintendo too.
that's
Like,
a big take, man. 200 million.
dude, kind of insane. I don't know. I'm just
I
super
mean,
pumped.
I feel like Switch is still going, man. And there's gonna be, I actually just had a family friend who just bought a Switch
Really?
for his kid, and I was like, "Hey, man, Switch 2 is about to like come out real soon," and he had no idea,
Yeah.
And I feel like even after Switch 2 comes out, if they would just do a price cut on the Switch, which is kind of insane, but
Yeah.
I don't think the Switch has ever had a price cut, really.
Really never. And honestly, what they did was smart though. What they did, what Xbox kind of was doing in the prior generation, is making multiple models. And Nintendo's always had this kind of motto where you make the Switch or you make some piece of hardware and then you make lighter versions of it. So the Switch Lite being $200 already, it's super affordable.
Yeah, it kind of feels that niche, so you
Yeah,
don't really have to discount the original.
exactly. Parents see it out in the wild. They're shopping at some store at Target or Walmart, and they go, "Yeah, I'll pick that up for my kid. They deserve that for Christmas." So it's just a win-win overall.
Yeah, and I still see Switch doing numbers. Like I still expect it to hit 160. Like I
It's
think it could
possible.
even surpass the DS because I think the DS is like in
Very
the
close to that.
160s,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I mean, I have never been like the biggest Nintendo fanboy. When I was younger, I could never play Game Boy because my dad thought I would go blind, so I had to hover over my friend's shoulder when he would play Pokemon Red and
Oh
stuff like
man.
that. And my first Nintendo console, as ironic as it is, was actually the Wii U.
Oh
So,
my god, that late
and
into the generation,
and
huh?
I actually still enjoy the Wii U. I think getting into Super Smash for the first time of my life honestly made the Wii U just totally worth it for me.
Awesome,
I had
man.
so much fun with that in grad school.
Well, it's even funnier that you say this now because you joined into Nintendo in a generation where everyone perceived it so
Yeah,
poorly.
like the worst generation,
The
pretty
worst
much.
generation. And now you look at the Switch and they have, I think, 8 to 10 franchises on that system that have now all sold over 20 million
Yeah,
units,
that's crazy.
which is utterly insane because that's more than what the Wii U itself sold, which was 13 million units. So, and I mean, now that we're talking about this topic, I kind of want to get into is the new Nintendo Switch 2 leaks that have been kind of going around. And for those that don't know or aren't aware and that don't want to be spoiled, I mean, I'm going to talk about these for the next couple of minutes, but essentially, a lot of the hardware has been leaked. The controllers, the way they look, which are very similar to the Lenovo Legion Go, which are detachable via magnetics. You have a bigger display up to potentially 8 inch. The dock has been basically leaked. And so
Did they
it's
mention anything on if it's Hall effect joysticks? Because man, that Joy-Con drift is
Yeah. Oh
brutal.
man. I hope they fix that. And no, there hasn't been any mention of that. It's hard to tell even with the Joy Cons being leaked right now because the one thing that can't be tested is that for some reason people have the controllers leaked and in hand, but they don't have the actual console unit in hand,
They
which is weird.
probably haven't torn it down and everything yet
Yeah,
either.
and maybe it's getting leaked through China. It's hard to say, but it most likely, which means that the console's been manufactured probably since September,
Yeah,
October, and they're probably trying to stack this up so people can't scalp the hell out of it.
I totally anticipate it's gonna come out in like March or April.
Yeah, I do too. And
I wonder like if it's coming out in March and April, and that's exactly when the new graphics cards are coming out for laptops. I wonder what graphics chip is going to be in
it's a good
the.
question.
Like, do they have a contract with Nvidia and they're going to get the newest stuff, or is it going to be something older?
It's going to be put like somewhere in the middle. It's so custom. It's older architecture, but
So it's cheaper,
customized. It's
yeah.
cheaper, but yeah, it's customized to like work for them. So it's like somewhere in between, and that's what happens with all consoles where they get something unique, like what PS5 and Xbox did with AMD, but then they customize what
Yeah.
AMD had.
So, do we know if it's going to be backwards compatible?
We do know they've definitely confirmed that about a month ago, Nintendo itself, which is great.
Thanks.
For those that have been purchasing Switches over the holiday break, it's not a bad thing. They can then sell it and
Trade it
upgrade
in, yeah.
again, but keep the games. I don't know. I'm excited because now that all of the hardware has been leaked, I just want to see software. I don't even care anymore. It doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't get me excited anymore.
So, and I think most people can probably guess, but what do you think is going to be the 1-2 punch for? Ironic, the 1-2 punch for Switch 2 when it comes out, because they had that with Zelda and
That's
Mario,
true.
right?
That's
So I
true.
feel like that's Nintendo's
I think
game. Because if you think about it, if you just have one exclusive, you're like, oh, I really want this, but I don't know. And then when you get two, you're like,
yeah.
oh man, I gotta.
So we know already 2 Switch games have been announced for 2025, which I think are going to be cross-gen. I think for sure Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is going to be cross-gen. So I
Day
think that's
one?
one. I think it's day one. I think you're going to get Pokemon Legends Z8 being cross-gen, maybe an optimized port of it on the Switch 2. I think that's going to be a huge hitter.
Think it'd be day one, or do you think it would be a little bit later? Because that's what they did with the Switch, right? Did they have Mario and Zelda a little separated?
They did. So I could see Pokemon being summer, fall. And then I wouldn't be shocked if Nintendo makes a second Pokemon game that comes like there's been rumors that they're releasing a second Pokemon game this year. I
Like a
don't
remake?
It's hard to say. Rumors. I don't know if it's a remake, a new spin-off again.
Are they gonna finally bring back your black and white?
Oh my god, I really want a black and white remake, man. That and then I think for sure Mario Kart 9. It's been due time. I think it's been a long time since we've gotten anything. 8 Deluxe has been out forever. It's been like 8 years.
That's so true. And outside of the DLC, I mean, that team must be working
It
on
has to
something,
be.
right? For
Yeah, it
after all
has to
those
be.
years.
And then I also think we're gonna get a new Mario RPG or open world game because that team hasn't released anything since Mario Odyssey. So it's been 7, 8 years now.
Might even get a new Xenoblade
We are getting a Xenoblade remaster.
remaster. Yeah.
So I could also see a new Xenoblade on
I
top
feel
of
like
it.
what Nintendo does well is it takes franchises that are kind of old and finds a way to keep them relevant. Where
Yeah.
they'll pair a remaster with the next, part of that
Yeah.
saga, right? As opposed to Nintendo, Sony and Microsoft, because it takes so long for them to develop
Right.
games. It's really hard for them to get that cadence when you have like a good remake or remaster followed by the next part of that saga.
Yeah, it is strange. Their games always seem to line up, the remake, remaster, and then a new version.
Yeah, like look
And
at Metroid, right? Like
yeah,
you had like and I feel like when you do that, you keep a game in the conversation, right? And
yeah,
if you really just have a spectacular hit with one game, then it'll remain in the
yeah,
conversation. But when you have Metroid popping up in multiple areas, right? Then it keeps people thinking about it.
yeah. That's definitely true. And I think again, the rumors has been that Nintendo has been sitting on a remaster of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker,
Oh,
and I could
okay.
see them releasing that with a remaster of Breath of the Wild because they demoed that at Gamescom last year. So I could see them releasing multiple iterations of Zelda for the Switch too as well.
Well, I also feel like Nintendo will kind of sit on things too, so they're probably I feel like they probably had the Switch 2 ready to go for a while, and they
Yeah,
were waiting until they could get that amazing cadence of like every 3 months,
yeah,
let's hit a banger. Because they don't need to release to beat Sony and Microsoft. They're
yeah,
kind of in their own lane. So they have the comfort and the ability to go when they want to go
yeah.
and just make sure that their software is lined up.
Yeah. And again, that was the rumor that they delayed the launch of the console, which was supposedly targeted for fall of 2024 into the first half of this year just to get that software ready. I think that's absolutely true. I think there's some truth to that. So I'm excited, man. I can't wait to see the software. I'm no longer excited by hardware leaks anymore. That used to be my thing when I was a kid, when I saw how the PS3 looked like, the
Yeah.
PS4, but that doesn't get me excited anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, I mean, there's how much raw power there is in the console, but there's
Yeah.
also the creative juice. And I know we've been a little bit hard on Nintendo because the raw power hasn't been there, but I mean the creative juice is at Nintendo, man. Like they find a way, and I'm excited that now they're going to have more raw power with those creative energies. But I mean, you do have to give it up to them to be able to pull off what they've done with the
So
original Switch hardware.
and you just jogged my memory here. So another leak that came out because everyone's like, well, what are they going to innovate with the Switch 2? It's just going to be bigger, a little better, a little more powerful. Well, they apparently, and part of the leaks, the Joy-Cons have optical sensors on the bottom now. So people think it could be used as like a mouse, kind of like the Legion Go, or potentially kind of like the Wii sensor and the infrared lights that they had on the Wii back in the day on the
Huh.
controllers. So again, it fascinates me because Nintendo always finds a way to create
If
and innovate.
if anyone's gonna find a way to make that work, it would be
Yeah, it'd be
Nintendo,
Nintendo.
because I mean they made it work with every single console, and even talking smack about the Wii U, yeah, I totally get it, but I was remembering reading something online when they were talking about the input lag difference between the Wii U gamepad and the actual console, and they were like it's virtually nothing because of the technology that they're using, and even though I think the PS Portal has been just a smashing success,
Yeah,
it makes you wonder if there could have been some different
yeah,
technology that
for
was used
sure.
there to help with the lag. It's one thing if you're obviously away from your system, but
Right.
if the whole thing is attached to your PS5 being around, it makes you wonder if you can have two systems working in tandem, and one allows you to have better connection in the house, and
Yeah,
one allows it to work outside the house, right?
right. That's exactly
And
it.
so again, to give Nintendo some credit, like they find a way with every generation, and they're smart enough to pivot away when it's not working,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly it too. They know that if they have to take an L and accept that they've done that, they'll admit it straight up, and they'll we've seen Satoru Iwata at the time when the Wii U was a failure say, "I'm taking a pay cut. The
Yeah,
Wii U was a failure. Like this was on us. This was on me. I'm
yeah.
taking that." And I agree. And I just wonder what's going to be after the Nintendo Switch too. Like I know that's so far ahead, but like
I don't see them really needing to change their formula. Like I feel
right,
like they've tried different things and it's all condensed together into the Switch, and I just don't see a better version of the Switch
point
unless they
to
go wireless, because now we are getting like wireless TV technology.
yeah.
That was a big thing in CES too. Unless they do that, I mean, what else does Nintendo want, need?
And I feel like their whole identity in the last 20 years has been building up towards the Switch. They've always done portable gaming. They've tried VR way in the past. They've done all this weird shit, and I feel like it's all been building to this. So where
Yeah,
do they go? And I don't really want to worry too much about it because again, what matters to me more now is their IP and their
yeah.
games and their brand, and the fact that they're moving into like movies and films and shows. I love that,
I
but
feel
it's
like
just
Nintendo
fascinating.
will somehow make handheld gaming or their version of gaming always relevant. And unless mobile gaming, even though mobile gaming is a massive market, to me it hasn't captured the same type of hardcore market as the general console space has. But to me, Nintendo is always going to be releasing that type of hardware. unless somehow they're creating new technology with phones that allow us to really feel like we're
Yeah.
getting a quality Zelda and Mario experience,
Right.
us feeling like the touchscreen is kind of a drag. I can see them pivot into that only if somehow hardware technology on phones evolves in such a way that it's not so cumbersome. Other than that, really just wireless connectivity. Beyond that, I feel like they're just going to milk the Switch model.
Yeah.
And
Maybe the generations start to last a little longer now. Maybe it's 8 years, 10 or 12 or 14 years. And you
yeah,
just have mid-cycle refreshes this time.
yeah. And I also think, this kind of goes into another thing that we wanted to talk about, just like zooming out at the big three, console makers and their strategies, right? As opposed to getting to the nitty gritty of all the games. And, you see Sony kind of doing this too, but, I think Nintendo is starting to really realize the power of their IP, right? Across different forms of entertainment. You're seeing the success of, Nintendo World, right?
Yeah.
Or Nintendo Land, I think that's what it's called. And I think that's one thing they're going to lean into a lot. I think at one point I showed you, and for anyone who's curious, you should totally look up a graphic of the most, money making franchises and where they make their money from. And I think Pokemon's pretty much on
Yeah.
top.
They're their
And
plushies, their
it's
merchandise,
through the
and their
plushies,
cards.
even though the game sells so well.
Yeah.
It's the plushies, and it blows your mind, right? And it goes to show you that it's important to create a fictional world with characters that really resonate with people, but really you're going to sell people on all the tangible things in the
Yeah.
real world, whether it's plushies, whether it's experiences like going to the movies, whether it's going to a park or things like that. That's where the big moneymaker is.
It's funny you say that too, because they really are leaning into the whole new Nintendo Land at Universal, because they even had a dedicated direct this past fall for it. They've never done something like that. A dedicated direct to talk about the new additions coming to Nintendo Land in America. I was honestly dumbfounded.
In a way, like, and this is something my wife is always telling me about, these are fictional worlds. They don't exist in the real world. But in a way, now you're crossing that gap because you're making it tangible items that people can experience. And for people who might not always understand, like, hey, this is like a virtual space, right? Like, how can it have so much meaning in someone's life? Like, now when you're seeing it tangible across the world, like, it kind of hits a little different.
It does. Now you can create specific food catered to their IP at the park. Your kids will now want to say, "Who's Donkey Kong?"
Yeah, I remember when I went to Japan a few years ago with her. We were really trying to get into a Pokemon cafe, and man, there were so many places that were difficult to get into in Japan, but that place was impossible. Like, it was impossible. So busy, so crowded. And it's not like you saw a bunch of gamers who were just like going in there and just going nuts over Pikachu. It just seemed like any other cafe, and it just seemed like people were really just enjoying the experience of being in a cafe that's immersed in a fictional world.
That's so cool.
And it's just such a cool overlap, and you're seeing that more and more. Like, even with Harry Potter, like, we're going to a Harry Potter dinner like in a couple of weeks, right? And me and my wife, we just went to see the new Cursed Child play, and you're seeing so many of those like real world experiences, right, with these fictional worlds. Or we just saw like a Harry Potter baking show on HBO Max, and it was actually pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, I actually was pretty interested in that. It was cool. Maybe you should check it out. It's on Max, but like, they were making all these cakes, and they had like the Griffin, they were just so creative with what they were doing. But it just goes to show you that, like, these fictional worlds are just loved across the world.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it can be like a sensory overload, because like with Harry Potter, for example, you got this game that just came out a year ago that's been a big hit. It was also controversial from the maker itself. You got this baking show you're watching. You got the shows they're remaking.
Oh yeah.
So sometimes
you can't just like go too hard on it. You got to give people some breathing space as well.
Exactly. And sometimes you're like ramming it down people's throat.
But it's kind of interesting. Like, I feel like people aren't really looking forward to the Harry Potter TV show that much. But in a way, there doesn't seem to be that same Harry Potter fatigue as there is with Star Wars, right? Like, I feel like there's like a massive Star Wars fatigue, right?
Because I think the difference being is that the products they've put out in the last several years for Star Wars has not been good. And so then they say, well, I'm tired of seeing bad things. If it's consistently good, you say, I want a little more, or I don't mind a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like across the board, like, people have their problems with the politics of Disney, and they have the problem with the politics of Harry Potter. But it doesn't seem like the Harry Potter franchise has suffered as much for it, even though it has. Don't get me wrong,
it has,
as compared to Star Wars and Disney.
But tell me, what's the last Harry Potter product that came out that wasn't that well received?
Honestly, I can't think of one that hasn't done just crazy numbers commercially. I mean, when Hogwarts Legacy came out, man, the internet was just going crazy. Right. And if you look at Twitter or X, or people have been raging about Harry Potter forever, and we're not trying to make this a political channel, so I'm not going to try and go into one side or the other.
But it still sold well.
But it still sold well, even though, man, that the amount of
Vitriol and
controversy and vitriol that was all around that from all sides, it's crazy, right?
Which is why I think when I look back at Star Wars, I feel a little tainted. My mouth is, because it's like, oh yeah, episode 8 and 7, I didn't personally like, and I think, sorry, episode 9, and I think there's a lot of people that didn't like it, and I think they've created so many shows that were hit or miss.
There really hasn't been anything that's hit super well consistently, right? Since the Disney phase. Like, I like Mandalorian, don't get me wrong, for certain seasons, but even Mandalorian, they kind of ran that with seeing Baby Yoda everywhere.
That's when they're milking, because they're now making a film on it, and it's like, did anyone really need a film now on Mandalorian? I don't think so. That's the next movie that's coming out. So that's where you start milking the franchise. That's called milking the franchise, or milking a property, because you're going so overboard. It's like, again, yes, I've had a couple of hit or misses, but like, take a break. Like, if you look at, let's say, Jurassic Park, right? In the last 10 years, they brought back Jurassic Park, and they made 3 or 2 successful movies, and they're making a third with Scarlett Johansson now. And I'm like, I'm okay with that they're switching it up and they're bringing in different actors, because consistently these movies are fun. They remind me of my childhood, and they're not overdoing it.
I do feel like there is some fatigue with Jurassic Park. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, and I am definitely going to go watch the new one as soon as it comes out. There is some fatigue, but not to the same level.
It's not to the same extent, and I'm not overly excited, but I'm not thinking of it in a negative connotation anymore. Yeah. So I'm like, you know what?
I feel like with Star Wars, there's that uphill battle. Like, there's actually some shows or show ideas that are coming out. I'm like, man, this is like kind of a cool idea. Yeah. But I can't get myself to watch it. Like, I think I had seen a leak. I don't know if this was confirmed at some point, that Disney is considering doing like the KOTOR time frame, like the Republic, for one of their shows, which I played KOTOR a little bit when I was a little kid, but man, I was so young that I really didn't comprehend what I was playing, but I had a blast, right? But that's so loved, and people have been wanting that for so long, and you would think, oh my God, people would be going crazy, but that fatigue is hitting hard.
And when you put out a bad product, you don't have any more faith from your fan base to say that the movie that I should be excited for, or the show I should be excited for, will actually be good now. So you've lost a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And I think with that being said, look, we just had a great game, Jedi, Fallen Order, Survivor. Great games, but I didn't get excited to play the second game. I played the first one, I beat it, I had fun, but
I gotta say, I wasn't super hyped going into Jedi Survivor, but I think we talked about my favorite games for 2023, and I was shocked. That game hit my top 5. Wow. I absolutely loved that game. I liked it more than Baldur's Gate. I liked it more than Alan Wake. I liked it more than most of the Game of the Years. And I just felt like that just did so much justice to the story of Star Wars. Do you care if I spoil it a little bit for you?
Not that you spoil it, but like, you can spoil it. But see, some people might say that game is a hidden gem. It really isn't, because we expected it to be great, because the first game was great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Respawn knows what it's doing. I mean, there's a little doubt that I have, because it's like, all right, Star Wars is a little played out. Like, how can you make me care about what you're doing? But there's a little bit of a spoiler, right? I don't think you'll mind too much, because it's not a huge spoiler.
Spoiler, Darth Vader is Luke.
No, there's one point where there's actually one of the characters that's fighting Darth Vader, and like, obviously you know what's going to happen, because you know what Darth Vader does later in the movies, right? And in spite of me knowing the ending, I was still so invested into that battle and what happened to the characters. And that just goes to show you, man, they did a great job with their writing and knowing their audience, because that's the prequel problem. Like, if you know how it's going to end, why should I care how it goes? For that game, man, they hit it. And it's so sad that you just had this, like, people drowning in Star Wars. And because of that, like, people don't even, like, pay attention as much to the thing. Like, the one just amazing thing that's happened in the last few years.
And that's so funny, because I believe Respawn has said this is going to be a trilogy, so maybe the next game would be the last, I think. And it's sad, because probably this game sold worse than the first. And then they're going to say, well, wow, like, will we get the same budget for the third game? Do we have to make it?
I don't even know what their budget was like, but
it's the same problem that Final Fantasy VII Remake is having. Rebirth sold not as well as Remake. And then they go, well, we need to get this third and final part out. Do we give it the same budget anymore? Was it worth the investment? So it's just sad.
I really hope they get a good budget on that because I think EA gets a lot of flack, just like Ubisoft and everyone, and but EA is, to me, I don't know if this is a contentious take, but they're really not that bad. They actually do try. They tried with Immortals of Avium. They're actually trying with new IP. I think Jedi was really good.
And they're giving what's his name, Joseph Ferris.
They're giving Joseph Ferris a
lot of freedom
blanche to do whatever he wants, and they're trying to come up with new IPs, and of course they're going to do sports games forever. But when you compare them to the woes of Ubisoft,
But the thing is with EA, because maybe we can talk about this a little bit. There's a stigma attached to the name because 10 to 15 years ago, they truly were horrible.
Oh yeah,
they did fire a lot of people. They did cut off a lot of games. They didn't innovate. They didn't create. And that has stuck with them for so long that even when they are doing good, they can't wash off the bad. And so, I feel
like Microsoft?
It is kind of like Microsoft. People don't
forget.
And
we're all like elephants, man. We don't forget.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's not like I feel bad for these companies either, because guess what? They're still making money.
Their CEOs are killing it.
Yeah. So while I applaud the fact that they're giving more freedom and time to create new games, I'm not upset with the fact that people still look at them with a little bad eye. It is what it is, and you vote with your wallet. That was always my saying. I'll buy the games that look enjoyable to me, and if I enjoy them, hey, that's all that matters to me. I don't care what the internet thinks anymore, about something. I used to be really hardcore and leaning towards a specific opinion. If someone on the online said, hey, don't support EA because of X, Y, or Z, maybe I would believe it. But now I'm just I just want to play a good game.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is such an echo chamber. So I was just talking to, my wife, and she was talking about how, she's more into the baking world and things like that. And, even her, she'll go on YouTube and she'll look at some of the comments that people are having, and she's like, what in the world? Why are people hating for no reason? And I mean, you see that a lot in algorithms because it feeds on itself. And don't get me wrong, if, we should hold people accountable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? But I think what really bothers me is if you have a contrary take, and it's actually a contrary take. You're not just trying to be contrary and be edgy. You actually just feel different than everybody else. I feel like it's hard to have an opinion that's not going along with the masses. It's always been like that, but especially in the social media age, it's just so much harder. Yeah. I talked about this in our last podcast, and I've actually thought about it more and more. I really do think my game of the year is Dragon Age Veilguard. And I never expected to say that after the game came out, because after I saw reviews from a lot of the prominent YouTubers, I was like, dang, I don't know if I want to try this. This does not sound like what I want. And maybe because I went into that game already knowing its flaws, that's why it didn't bother me as much. But looking back, there was good games in 2024. I do think it was kind of a quiet year, but that was probably my favorite game.
But you have to also look at it from multiple perspectives too. It's one thing to consume a product as a consumer. It's another thing for you who are, you're a writer itself, and then you're able to kind of relate furthermore to this game because there's a bunch of writers building this game in a specific way that might have called to you.
Well, that's one thing me and you have kind of talked about too. Sometimes I'll like a movie or I like a TV show or a game solely because of how it inspires me. If I play a game and it makes me feel something and I'm inspired, even if the game is kind of crap, I'll be kind of excited. So the thing that I think about is Hellblade 2, right? And to me, I think it's a terrible game, but I think it's a really good a digital experience,
Plus about the topic itself that it kind of goes about. That's again in your field.
That's in my field. I give them so much respect for them and the authenticity of it and how realistic it's going. The more I thought about this game, I realized that I think it was almost in their quest to make this very similar to the real lived experience of Psychosis, that the gameplay suffered because, one of the things I was thinking about is you have to get these rocks that line up with each other, right? And so, when you think about the lived experience of Psychosis, it's kind of interesting how, you're seeing something that's there, but it's not there, right? And it's kind of messing with your mind, was it there or was it not there? And so that's so fascinating, and it might actually be more realistic. But from a gameplay perspective, you're kind of just I don't know, man, I'm not feeling it. It's just putting three rocks together and opening up a doorway, you know.
But that's why, again, to kind of compare, and I'm not trying to belittle people that are purely consumers of a product that don't then have experience in the field. But when you do have someone like yourself that's been in the medical field or are a writer, or me who's been a software developer that understands how much effort it takes to build and develop a product like a video game, you have a different opinion
Yeah.
of those
I think
people.
you can appreciate it for different things. Like,
Yeah,
are you appreciating it for the entertainment value, for the gameplay value,
right.
or what are you appreciating it for? And I think what I try and do is like, try to be more objective at some points and say like, what did I take away from this, and like, what did I appreciate and not appreciate? And
Right.
so like, for Hellblade, like it gets my creative juices thinking when I think about like a little bit of spoilers. It's been out for a while on Game Pass, so you should play it. But just the concept of mass hysteria. What does that look like in older generations, right? Where we don't have science and we're forming opinions about the world around us by the stories that we're being told. We're not able to look at like a microscope, right? And
Yeah.
like look at what's actually there. And so, in a society like that, how easy can mass hysteria propagate, and what does that look like, right?
Mhm.
And so that's just such a fascinating idea, and I feel like it can be toyed with, and I don't see that popping up a lot in fiction. So for me, any media that's able to capture like a fascinating take on something when everything is so rehashed, like I'm gonna give you so much credit because I'm like, man, I struggle with coming up with fascinating takes.
Exactly.
And so again, like that's the balance that those creators had to take because I think in their decision to really be authentic and realistic and unique, right, to their vision, I do think the gameplay suffered,
Yeah.
right?
That's
And
fair. That's a fair take.
and that's why I think it's so divisive because if you're looking at it as a game, you're like, man, what is this? But if you're appreciating different parts of it, then you're going to come away and think it's like an 8 or a 9, right?
Exactly. And that's why I think coming back to what your wife said about these comments on like YouTube
Oh,
videos
yeah.
and stuff, most of them, again, as unfortunate as it is, don't have a lot of that experience. And so they're looking at it from one viewpoint and they go, hey, I didn't like it because the gameplay wasn't that in depth or there wasn't that much
Yeah.
substance to it. Fair enough. Well, a lot of other people are going to appreciate it for different reasons then. And so, like I said, I like to now vote with my wallet. If I think a game looks enjoyable or plays enjoyably or written enjoyably, okay, I'm going to play it and enjoy it and love it and I'll keep it and I won't sell it and I'll remember it forever. So,
I mean, I think that's one of the benefits that we have because we're older adults now and like we can actually make choices with our wallet and
yeah.
like, consume what we want to consume. And if we get a game and we end up being disappointed about it, it's like, okay, I'll resell it. And, I
Mhm.
won't take a huge loss. That's like, do you know how expensive a dinner is
Right.
nowadays? Like, it's
Exactly.
not the biggest deal. I mean, I do feel for people who, they might not be in the same place in life or, I remember what we were like when we were
Yeah. It was
teenagers,
hard.
right? Like, if I got one bad game, man, how long is it going to take me to
Yeah.
get a new game?
Yeah.
I get it. I understand. I empathize, but that's why I'm a big a proponent of just saying what's really on your mind, right?
Yeah.
And being
How you
honest about
feel.
how you feel, as opposed to just kind of being in that echo
Yeah.
chamber.
Rather than just purely hating and jumping on a bandwagon because so many other people are hating on a company, or purely loving said game because everyone else is like, tell everyone what you
Yeah.
feel.
And speaking of this, try not to shy away too much from contentious topics. How are you feeling about Ubisoft?
Oh God! Oh. Honestly, I'm a little hyped about Assassin's Creed, the new game
I
that's
am
coming.
too.
What's it called? Shadows.
Shadows, yeah.
Honestly, with all the gameplay, they're actually showing small snippets of gameplay, so they're not showing a whole lot. They're teasing a bit, but it looks so great. Kind of looks better than Ghost of Tsushima. Like there's more freedom, more options to like stealth, to combat, and
I
it's
mean,
like I
you know
don't
me,
know.
I'm actually one of the few people who I just wasn't the biggest fan of Ghost of Tsushima. Like, now don't get me wrong. I'll preface this by saying that's an 8 out of 10 game for me. It was a solid game, but people talk about it across the board like it's a 9 out of 10. And
Right.
and for me, so sometimes I feel a disconnect because you'll see a game that has amazing sales, the same Open Critic score, and yet people will talk about games in a completely different light. Starfield, I'm sure Starfield did good numbers, and Open Critic wise, not that bad. I think it's sitting at like a 84 or 85. But think about the conversation around that,
Yeah, it's been pretty
compared to
poor.
Ghost, If I had to take a guess, maybe Ghost is sold more, but it's not like either of those are bad selling
The
games, right?
numbers Xbox I think releases that they have had 13 million unique players play Starfield, so that's a
It's
lot.
a ton of people who have played, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't push the needle on Game Pass a ton, but overall, I think it was a success for them, right?
Yeah.
But just the conversation around that's so different. And so that's why going into Ghost of Tsushima, I was expecting to walk away with The Last of Us or God of War, which are like some of my favorite games
Yeah.
ever. And it just wasn't there. It was a solid 8. And I thought the story was pretty good. It wasn't like blow me away good. It was kind of a little cliche. I thought it was pretty good. Characters got more interesting as time went on because at first they were kind of boring. I wasn't feeling the gameplay though. And I felt like I was kind of cheesing a lot of the game and I didn't really feel the need to kind of do things kind of differently. And so to me, Assassin's Creed looks great. I've always wanted Assassin's Creed in Japan,
Yeah.
and I think the gameplay looks terrific.
Well, I think so. They're doing some unique things here. First, let me say this: I'm very cautiously optimistic about the game because the last several games that came out, even though they sold well, weren't for me. To be quite honest,
The Assassin's Creed games?
yes. But what's going into
What is the last Assassin's Creed game you've played?
Oh my god! The last one that I've actually played through and beat, I think it was. I want to say 3.
Wow.
I want to say 3. So I didn't even get to play Black
You
Flag.
didn't even play 4? 4 was so good.
Which is what everyone says. But one is I'm cautious about this game, but two, they're bringing in something really unique, which is not only do they have 2 protagonists, you get to play as both of them throughout the story. So there'll be a change of pace in the story that says, hey, you can no longer play as the assassin. You got to now play as the samurai, and vice versa. And you have to switch between.
I like how they're pretty different. You know, I haven't played every Assassin's Creed game. I think they tried to do something like that with Syndicate, where there was a male and female protagonist. They did the same thing with Odyssey, male and female protagonist. Right. But if the 2 characters are actually fundamentally very different,
yes,
you know, that could be pretty interesting.
But that's the thing. So this is not just a male or female body, and you just play as one or the other. There's a unique story about both of them in the game, and you might be forced to play as both at some point in the game. And you say the experience, like I can't beat this enemy type, I might have to switch over to the other playing style. And
I'm not sure like what part of Japan it is or like where it's at, but look, I love Ghost, but you know, to Ghost's credit, like they did such a great job with that story. And I mean, how many of us actually knew about the island of Tsushima beforehand, right? Yeah. But if Assassin's Creed Syndicate Shadows is not held down by that, I would love to see Kyoto. You know, I would love to see Osaka, you know, from back in the day. I'd love to be around the Osaka castle. Like, that would be so cool for me. So, actually, going into 2025, like, that's one of my most hyped games. Now, I understand, don't get me wrong, that, man, Ubisoft has just been on a losing streak lately. So, I can understand how there's a lot of reservations. But I just hope people do give it a chance. Because if we do get a quality Assassin's Creed game after so long, and because of the controversy surrounding the game and because of how much people just frankly hate Ubisoft after like 5 major disappointments,
which
I just wouldn't want the one good gem to just fail.
And look, every Assassin's Creed game that's come out, regardless of how it's been viewed, has sold well. So it's not like any of them have been a financial flop in any means. It's just that the games have gotten more and more expensive, and the profit and revenue they've made off the games has become smaller and smaller over years.
So speaking of how expensive games have gotten, right? I just read this today, I think. Do you know how much it cost for them to make, I think it was Call of Duty Cold War?
700 million.
700 million, and that's without marketing.
And
oh my goodness.
And if you think about it, they only sold 30 million copies compared to Modern Warfare, the remake, which sold 40 million and was less expensive. So they're diminishing returns in terms of the amount of money.
And the cost is skyrocketing. So look, I mean, I hate microtransactions. I really hate microtransactions. I never buy them. But yo, if it's taking you $700 million to make it, plus the cost of
do you now understand why they're doing what they're doing?
It's crazy. Like, you're going to have to make over $1 billion just to make profit to make the next game. And you got to find a way to cut costs, but then you're so screwed because if you've hired too many developers and now you need to cut developers, everyone's going to hate you for that. Yeah. But it's hard to, and it's taking so many years to make games, so you can't even recoup costs by having multiple releases. Yeah. It's a mess.
So think about it this way. This game is so expensive with them reusing assets. Imagine if they waited every 3 to 5 years and they try to innovate, it would be even more expensive. And now you understand why they take a lot of their in-house studios and make them support studios.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Raven and what was the company they bought out?
I totally forgot, yeah.
But they now made them
I think they were making Toys for Bob's even at one point.
They all made them support studios because they need the help. If they want a quality product to sell well, at least at a minimum, don't get me wrong, it sounds pretty greedy, but it's like, they want it to be financially successful. Yeah. And in order to do that, like, again, look at Ubisoft. Look at what was the game Defiant? X-Defiant.
That's exactly why
flop.
I brought the example of Call of Duty up. And look, I mean, we all hate the microtransactions of Call of Duty. So maybe not the best example, but my point is these rising development costs on games that are not going to be smash hits. You know, like, your Sony game is going to be a smash hit. You'll make up your cost. But if you're trying to make AAA games like Star Wars Outlaws and Skull and Bones, and if any of those don't hit the mark, you are losing hundreds of millions of dollars each time, right?
Well, let's talk about that too, because Sony, Naughty Dog releasing the trailer for their latest game. What was it called?
Interstellar?
Intergalactic.
Intergalactic.
Intergalactic. they had a bunch of like weird ads in there with Adidas,
Yeah, I wonder
Porsche,
if they're making money off
and I
of
wonder
that.
if they're subsidizing the
Yeah.
cost by saying, "Well, we'll put your stuff in this
Well, I
game
know
now."
Microsoft actually debated about like having in-game ads too, right?
Yeah,
So
they
like for
have.
live services, I feel like they would totally do that. Like I feel
Yeah.
like for your traditional campaign game, like that would drive
Yeah,
people insane.
because it's not that intrusive.
Yeah,
But when you play a single player game and then you see Adidas all over the place or Coca Cola all
yeah,
over the place,
that's gonna be
it
kind of
kind of gets
weird.
kind of annoying. They did that in Death Stranding. You had, I think, Monster energy drinks. Like you could
Oh,
drink that. Like it was weird.
I mean, I find it hard to believe that Monster would actually like pay
Mhm.
for that because it's like, I mean, are you trying to tap into people's unconscious? Because I didn't remember seeing any monsters,
Yeah, you could.
or
So
maybe I did and I just forgot about
I'm
it.
pretty sure you could drink Monster energy drinks in that game. So it was again. And that would make sense because Hideo was just starting off again as like an
Yeah,
independent, and it's like he needed the money. His game only sold 2 to 3 million copies. That's not enough to pay for a whole studio's worth.
yeah.
He needs as much money as possible. So yes, it makes sense that people are trying to subsidize their games now because they're way too expensive. And you can't keep making a 3 or 4 or $500 million game only to sell what 2 million units,
Yeah,
5 million units.
yeah, you're gonna massively be in the hole, and nobody wants to pay even $70 for a game.
Yeah,
So you're gonna be massively in the hole. And I say all that because, man, I am so worried about Ubisoft in 2025.
yeah. I mean, they're scared of a hostile takeover. They want Tencent to buy them out, but they still want to keep control, which I don't really see being possible. Tencent's basically saying we're not going to buy you if the Guillermo family keeps control,
Yeah,
of the voting rights and whatever. So I don't see that being a
but I
thing.
feel like if this, because from what I'm remembering, they're just gonna hit us with a ton of Assassin's Creed games, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like
So
that's like, for instance, that's like Disney, like, oh man, we're screwed. Let's just keep making sequels, right? Because now we need to go to our bread and butter. So I feel like now this is
yeah. So I think
Ubisoft, like, man, we got to give people what they want. Let's just drown them in Assassin's Creed.
yeah,
And
and
if
I
it doesn't
think
work out,
well, I think it was Jason Schreier or maybe I forgot who it was. Someone from the media that basically came out and said, "Oh, expect 12 Assassin's Creed
yeah,
games in the next 6 years." So that's two a year. We don't need that much
drown
Assassin's
us
Creed.
in Assassin's
Yeah,
Creed.
So you're right. And I'm again not that I'm worried that we're going to lose a whole bunch of franchises because you have Far Cry, you had Splinter Cell at one point, and Assassin's Creed, which were like the biggest IPs. Would I be upset if those IPs were gone? Maybe, but at the same time,
I
it's
mean,
like
I really do feel like in 2 to 3 years, Ubisoft is going to be bought out. I just don't know by who,
yeah,
but
I think Tencent will be the entity, but here's the
probably.
bigger problem. There was so much bloat at this company, 20,000 employees. Whoever buys them out is going to fire a ton of people.
Oh
And I
my
think that's
goodness, yeah.
worse than losing anything else. Like, even if you lost some of your IP and you say, we're never going to touch this thing for 10 years, the fact that you're going to have to fire a bunch of people because
Yeah.
you're running
It's going to
inefficiently.
suck, and I mean, look, I'm sure everybody was working hard, but if you have management that's just not leading you in the right direction,
Yeah.
then yeah, like it's
How
very
many,
expensive
oh,
and you're not recouping those costs,
yeah.
if management is screwing around and,
How many
they,
games has Ubisoft canceled at this point in the last
oh
two
yeah.
years?
Oh yeah. And I mean, how long did they work on Skull and Blow?
Oh my God.
What happened to
Yeah,
that?
or they announced the Prince of Persia remake in India. Canceled that.
Oh my goodness.
Like, come on, man. Like, how many games are they going to do this to? So,
I do feel like 2025 is going to be a lot of the big stories we're going to see are going to be revolving Ubisoft,
I do.
because I feel like there's a lot moving there. And
Well, you know what's actually really sad? Ubisoft was always a supporter of Nintendo Switch hardware every generation, and they made Mario plus Rabbids. What was it? A Sparking Hope or
that's
whatever,
true.
and those sold incredibly well. Especially the first part of that game sold 10 million units, and they were very well reviewed, like critically. Amazing games. So I don't know. It's just sad because I don't think they're going to have the opportunities to innovate and make those small games like that or like a Pentiment style type of game anymore. They're not going to take the chance, the risk anymore to do that. They just want, like you said, want their bread and
Yeah,
butter.
yeah. Well, actually, in my backlog, I still do have the Prince of Persia that just came out. So
Oh yeah.
probably the only reason I haven't actually played that game yet is because I bought it on my PS5 because it was $5 cheaper, and I probably should have bought it on my Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, man. I'm telling you, any game that you want to play now that's like somewhat niche, buy it on the Switch, man. Those cartridges sell really well. Which, by the way, I think the rumor was they canceled the sequel already.
Oh man, so then it really didn't do good numbers then.
Yeah, not at all.
All right. So, I thought we would switch gears a little bit and talk about what we've been playing lately. So, it's been a couple of weeks now. You had some time in the holidays. What have you been up to? What have you been playing?
So I've been playing Borderlands 3, maybe 15 to 20 hours in. I'm about halfway through. I actually ended up playing some of the DLC, which I bought, which I didn't even realize I activated in the game. It's not really straightforward to know what missions are part of which the main story of the DLC. But overall, I think it's a great game. I understand the concerns that people have had about Borderlands 3 and going into Borderlands 4 that, hey, the writing of these two antagonists were horrible, and I can see it, and I understand why. But the gameplay loop is still there. It reminds me of Halo Infinite, where the loop was down, perfect, it was great, but the story was just hit or miss. Some of the open areas weren't there. Same thing with Borderlands. It's like, wow, the guns, the loot, the grind, it's so fun and fantastic. It sinks you in really quickly.
What's good that they still have the grind. They still
Yeah.
got that down because I feel like so many companies have tried to make that grind a thing, and they just haven't been able to do it.
Yeah, they really have. And I think even when you have a really bad story, it still makes this game to me like an 8 out of 10. And that's really solid because this game, I think, sold 10 to 20 million units in the last several
Really,
years. So it was very
I did
successful.
not expect that from Borderlands 3. Wow.
Exactly, which is crazier because that's probably why they justified making a film out of
Oh
it.
yeah, and that thing bombed so
And then
bad.
it bombed, and they said, "Well, why? Because so many people buy this game." And they go, "Okay, maybe they didn't plan right because they hired the wrong
But
actors."
I think it's so funny that whenever these things happen and like some movie or some game or something underperforms, they try and come up with a reason why it underperformed,
Yeah,
other than just saying that, yeah, the writing sucked.
yeah, exactly. The writing truly sucked on
They
that movie.
always will blame everything else in the
Yeah,
world, like, oh, the market just wasn't as
yeah,
excited
yeah.
for it as we thought they
I
would
just
be.
don't understand. Yeah, like okay. And I think from like the only way from this point now is up. Like the writing was bad, and I don't think they can really screw this up with Borderlands 4. At a minimum, you're not going to get something worse. So I'm not worried because
And
as
there's
long
a
as
lot
they
of
keep
pent up energy too for that type of game because I
yeah,
mean, who knows what's going on with Destiny now, right? And
exactly. There's not that many games that are going to
and
match
so there
this.
really isn't any good looter shooters
Looter
that are on
shooters
the horizon.
that are cooperative,
Oh yeah,
that have always played well. And you know, games that I can kind of find that are somewhat similar but aren't in the same genre is like Diablo. That always
yeah.
had that loot aspect with cooperative play, but again, they're so few and far between.
But
And I,
I do feel like, and maybe I just feel this way because I don't play a lot of battle royales, but I do feel like the shooting genre just hasn't been the same in this generation.
yeah,
Like a lot of the big players just aren't really making shooting games, right? Like first person shooters.
yeah,
Look at Killzone and Resistance.
yeah,
Where have
gone.
those been? They're gone, right?
Well, we were supposed to be in a perfect art game, but that's been silent. You know.
Yeah, I mean that'll come out eventually, but if you think about like this generation, what big shooters are there other than Call of Duty? I loved Halo, but I'll admit that it underperformed, right? You don't really have those just interesting franchises.
Yeah.
There's been Battlefield, but that really underperformed, right? And you don't even get a campaign anymore.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a pent up desire for those classic return of the
Yeah.
shooter, the FPS, and
Because what's popular now is Counter Strike, still Team Fortress, things that again have been monetized so heavily because
yeah.
it's like an esports type of game now at this point. And don't get me wrong, there's a very unique community for that, and
Oh
people
yeah,
play it all the time, hundreds of thousands on Steam. It's always top five, but it's not the game that
yeah.
I've been wanting to
Yeah,
play.
and I know Extraction's on the horizon. I know
Yeah,
Battle Royale is still popular, but as we can see by all the games that do well, people still care for single player
yeah,
narrative games, right? Or
100%.
cooperative games that you can play on the couch or online. And
Which
so
is
that first person shooter niche is just gone. You have people going to Elden Ring now in
yeah,
order to like fulfill that niche or Monster Hunter. And it
which is
used
why
to
it's
be
so popular.
shooters, right?
Yeah, you see,
Because people want to play together, and unless you're hopping online on a free to play game, like I feel like most people aren't playing together.
which is so funny because the next shooter that I'm legitimately excited for is coming from a publisher that barely ever makes them, and that's Nintendo. That's Metroid Prime. You
That's
know,
a good point.
it's like that will fill a void, and I actually think that will sell better than most Metroid games. I think the highest selling Metroid game is like not Dread. It was maybe the Prime games, and that was like 3 million units
Oh
or
wow.
something. Nothing. I do feel like Metroid Prime 4 is going
Oh
to actually be a great system seller, and
oh
I
yeah.
don't
I
think
think it's
people
gonna
anticipate
sell like
that.
hotcakes, because there's a lot of pent up desire for
Yeah,
that. I mean, for me, I think I'm a big Halo fan. I'm always gonna be excited for the next Halo, but I'm excited for Perfect Dark.
yeah.
I'm even excited for the next Call of Duty. This is an opportunity to talk about that, but I've actually just been getting into Black Ops 6, and I've actually been pretty pleasantly surprised. I already expected my experience to be better than what I anticipated based off the reviews, but the campaign is different. It's really not what you would expect. And I know you haven't really played it, so I won't go into too many details. But there was actually one level, and I don't know if you read about this online, but I felt like I was playing Alan Wake. It was so creepy and so much fun. They basically like kind of spoilers, but they took zombies, right? And then they found a way to like stitch that in, right? And
Really?
so like a lot of the zombie enemies you're fighting is actually in the campaign,
Wow.
but they found a way to kind of add a horror element to it. And
Interesting.
um
Wouldn't
and
expect that.
and again, this is what I mean when I say if there's anything I can see that kind of gets those creative juices flowing, I'm gonna really be a big fan of that. And there was one scene in particular in that level where you basically have to find some files and move around and stuff like that. And then there's a bunch of mannequins in the room. And what you don't realize is the mannequins are the enemies. And so you're moving around doing something, and they're actually moving closer to you each time. But you don't really notice it because you're just like, oh, it's just a bunch of mannequins. Like you're not expecting it to be that kind of game. All of a sudden, I start getting hit. And I'm like, what is going on? And I turn around. It's just like 50 mannequins are in front of my face, like beating the crap out of me. I'm just like shooting all of them. I'm moving around. The mannequin's staying still and it's moving towards me again. I'm just like, what in the world am I playing?
I would not expect this from
Call of Duty. That's what I was kind of getting at because I'm really hoping that they're able to flex more of their muscles going forward. But I like the fact that they're actually trying to do new things in Call of Duty. And I remember I haven't played all the Call of Duties, but I'm pretty sure this has not been a thing. There's one level in particular, and they were trying to make it a little bit more open world with side missions and things like that. And I know they kind of try to do that in Modern Warfare 3, but essentially it just felt like you were cloning off of the Battle Royale, right?
Yeah.
But this actually felt like its own unique take. And so basically you get in like a Humvee and you just kind of go all around like the desert, and you have like 3 objectives and you can hit them however you want. But there's a whole bunch of side missions across this entire area. And when you do the side missions, you'll actually get perks and better guns and all those type of things. And you can carry them throughout the whole level. And they substantially change how you can play the rest of the level, and they substantially change really the gameplay, right? And at one point I got like a bomber and I was just like going crazy and killing everyone with the stealth bomber. And in Modern Warfare 3 it was kind of annoying because when you had those levels, if you died you had to restart, and it was so annoying. But in here, like, I love that forward progression I still got while I was doing these side missions, and some of them almost kind of had a story. Like there'd be like a down transport copter, and then you have to like protect the guy, and then you call in airstrikes. And I was like, man,
this is how you branch out and you make Call of Duty unique. Like everyone, okay, single player used to always be an afterthought, like all the time, to the point where I'm sure they saw the numbers and said no one's playing it. And I think the fact that they now split their development to have 2 teams, one doing multiplayer and one doing single player now, is actually kind of a boom.
And I like the way they're kind of flexing their muscles. And I feel like with Halo Infinite, it was trying to do something different with like the open world, and it didn't fully hit with a lot of people. And I feel like with Call of Duty, they're being very mindful and careful, and they're kind of just slowly integrating changes in each one so it doesn't feel so overwhelming all at once. And I've actually really been enjoying the Black Ops campaign. I'm really enjoying the game, even the multiplayer overall. I'm surprised that it's not really higher up in people's lists. Like, I know it's not cool to like Call of Duty, and say it's like in your top 5, but I really feel like probably Call of Duty is in my top 5 right now.
So this is the unfortunate part now about annualizing a franchise like this. So when you do have a game that's really well liked, even by the masses, like really average FPS players like us, I would kind of say, like, we don't play it often, right? Or competitively. The fact that there's going to be a new one a year later is kind of sad because you won maybe 2 years, because there's so much stuff.
I am curious to see what they'll do. Like, I know there was that rumor that the new Xbox is coming out in 2026 with the new Call of Duty, and I wonder if Microsoft is really going to do that and release the next Modern Warfare along with it, because I know that would be a smash hit, but they could kind of ride the wave on Black Ops 6 for a while.
They could. I want to talk a little bit about multiplayer. This is a specific aspect. So Call of Duty in the last several years has now been incorporating cross-media events into their game, kind of like what Fortnite's been doing. And the most unique one's been Squid Games. And so now you can play Red Light, Green Light.
I saw that, yeah.
Which is hilarious because as you're playing, not only can you play as the characters from the show, when red light hits, you have to stop. And if you move, you get sniped out of nowhere. And it's honestly, I thought it was the dumbest thing when I heard about it, but when I saw it, it's so legit. I was like, this is how you hype people up, not only on the show, this is how you innovate.
It's great media, I mean, I tried this mode out, like, wasn't for me. Like, I played it once, I probably wouldn't play it again, but like, it's interesting.
It's
It's
interesting.
different, and I feel like especially in the streaming world, like it gets people talking, gets people
Yeah.
interested in things like that,
And
and
it creates so many unique clips online. Like those 30-second clips where it's like,
oh yeah.
hey, I tried to get this guy, I had to pause, and then he got sniped.
Yeah, I remember I was playing that, and then my wife walked by, and she was like, "What in the world is this?"
And that's so funny because it's so recognizable by people who don't play
Oh
the
yeah.
game.
Oh, she instantly knew what it was, and she was like, "What in the world is going on here?"
Yeah.
Because I mean, even the audio, like you just recognize it
Yeah,
right away.
yeah, exactly. So I have to again give some props to Activision. As weird as that sounds, is like this was the first time in a while where I think it had a 4-year development cycle, and I want to say they actually took the time to make it pretty polished and unique.
I actually wonder if a lot of these first person shooters, like eventually as time goes on, if we're actually going to truly get open world, like,
I think so.
RPG first person shooters, like kind of like Cyberpunk. If
And
we're going to reach a convergence point where, like we talked about with RPGs,
yeah,
now you have RPG label, but really you have some RPGs that are like Dragon Age, which are all action and they don't have the original RPG elements in
yeah,
them, right? Versus like Baldur's Gate. And so that RPG term is just so broad, or action game is so broad, and I wonder if shooters are going to start evolving in that same direction.
we already have. We already have. So we've seen it with Gears, and that transition happened in what, Gears 5.
Gears 5, yeah.
But again, hit or miss. So if you go to that and you go, well, this is, we wanted to innovate as a developer, but we didn't see the numbers we wanted to, and then all of a sudden you say we're remaking Gears of War and it's going to be linear again.
Yeah.
And that's disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone's just been like kind of getting their feet wet a little bit. Like Call of Duty did it, Halo did it, Gears did it, and I wonder like when is going to be the time where we actually get someone jump right into it, and they're just like from the ground up, let's try and actually make an open world shooter, and what does that look like? Because Cyberpunk did it from the perspective of like a good RPG team. What about you have someone come from the opposite direction? Think about God of War. It's always had those action elements, but now, even though it was in a true RPG, you did see God of War Ragnarok start steering in that direction a
Right.
little bit harder,
Yeah,
and
yeah, it
so
definitely did.
it feels like
The
there's a
levels were no longer
convergence.
linear. They were a little more fleshed out, semi-open world. You had RPG mechanics. And then maybe I didn't play the game for that aspect, but you go, there's something there that made the journey more worthwhile. It
Yeah.
wasn't this quick.
It makes it feel more like a bigger world.
Yeah, and I think when you look at God of War specifically, you go, oh, the first 3 games was like a boss rush. But
Yeah.
now when I play the game, it's like an actual story
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I can feel more, it's like more relatable because you're like, it's a journey.
Yeah.
It feels like a journey.
Because it feels like you're in the world and you have control over it,
Yeah.
as opposed to going level to level.
Exactly.
I mean, with me, I like my linear games. Don't get me wrong, but of course, like there's a balance. Like if you find like a good open world game you can get immersed into, like you're gonna lose me in that game.
Yeah.
Like Witcher 3, I got lost in that game. You just have to make sure that things feel relevant, right? And so if you got something like that for an eventual Call of Duty or Halo or Gears, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm excited for it. Again, there is open world fatigue, don't get me wrong, right? So many times someone says, well, let me justify the cost of the dollar I spend based on the number of hours I get in a game.
Yeah.
But that
I hate
doesn't
that.
always translate, right? But at the same time, this is where you innovate a little bit and say, well, we're going to make a spin off of Gears. We're going to make a spin off of Halo, call it ODST. And we're going to say, we're going to make a unique RPG out of that.
I mean,
IP.
think about how much people love that part of ODST, that you get to crawl around the city, right?
Yeah, and that was so awesome.
And that was so great for people, right? So, I do feel like as much as I do also have open world fatigue for bad open worlds, I do want to see some more open world shooters. Like I want to see what that idea looks like.
Yeah, no, I agree. So yeah, coming back to the topic itself, Borderlands 3 again has been on my mind. It actually has me wanting to play more. And once I beat it, I think the next thing I'm looking forward to is one of 3 games potentially, either getting into Indiana Jones, either potentially playing Avowed, because by the time I beat Borderlands, Avowed will
I think it's coming out about a month.
Yeah, in a month, or finally playing Last of Us Part.
Man, you need to get on that. That is
because the show season 2 has been announced now for April or May, and
that's
I'm
true.
like, okay, this might be time.
Although I think the TV show is only going to be probably half of Last of Us. I'm
sure
to the game, but yeah, man, I've been telling you, I've been hounding you to get on that game for so long because it again, in spite of the controversy, Last of Us 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. I had an absolute blast with that game.
Yeah, I have it. It's on my mind now. I want to prioritize that over the 100 other games I have in my backlog. So Honestly, me playing Borderlands, I wanted to play Indiana Jones, but I think knowing now from you that the start is kind of slow,
Yeah, yeah.
I might just do Last of Us.
I could talk a little bit about that. I started playing Indiana Jones, and I had mixed feelings going into it because I'm a big Xbox fanboy. So obviously, I really want to play every big Xbox game. And so that was a part of it. The graphics look amazing. I've always wanted to get in Indiana Jones, but I never did. So even at certain points, I try to like rewatch the movies and I just couldn't get into them. So I was pretty excited for it. I got good reviews. The thing with me is I have never liked stealth. Like in almost every game I play, if there's a stealth option, I'm gonna go guns blazing. That's actually what kind of pissed me off about Modern Warfare 3 because I tried to always go guns blazing and it did not always work out. But in Black Ops 6, it works out for me.
Okay.
But I say that because with Indiana Jones, like there's more sneaking around. I,
Okay.
I anticipated it, but it's just never kind of been my thing, right? So the gameplay of that has been, not the greatest for me. It's
Slower.
been slow. That's how I can describe it.
Yeah.
The gameplay feels slow because the puzzles take, maybe I'm just dumb, but it takes me a little bit of time to figure out all the puzzles, and sometimes I have to look it up. The fighting does get my adrenaline pumping up, but it does feel a little clunky to me,
Mhm.
and I kind of suck at it. But it's been fun. I will say the fighting has been kind of the best part of the gameplay for me. The traversal, I didn't know how I would feel about it going in, but the traversal really again mixed feelings because after you hop around places in Indiana Jones and you look back at other games, it's like you felt like a god and everything else, and now you're playing Indiana Jones and you're like, yeah, this is actually how people would move around,
Right.
like in an environment. So it feels realistic, but in a good way. It doesn't feel realistic in like an annoying way, right? Um, Now I say all that because those are the reasons why I haven't been able to blast through Indiana Jones, and I'm just kind of stuck in Egypt right now. The thing that's really keeping me going is, man, that story and those characters are so good. I don't really know Indiana Jones as a character, but dropped me into that game and so quickly I know exactly what Indiana Jones is like. I can kind of anticipate what he's going to say in each scene because he has such a strong personality. It's a lovable personality. So man, hats off to that team and the writers and everything in the story. And absolutely, I want to play through the whole game for the story. And I anticipate this game is probably going to be a solid 8, 8.5 for me. I don't know if it'll be a 9, but I just haven't been able to translate my hype for the game into actually me beating the game because I have found the game is a slower pace than what I'm used to.
Yeah, and that's why I try to now keep my expectations in check, no matter how good of a game I'm expecting out of any publisher. But it's so funny you say what you said because you never really watched the movies. Imagine if this wasn't an established franchise and they put this game out. You still probably would say, "Oh, there's an interesting story here."
I would probably still give it a shot, definitely,
Yeah,
because it just seems so polished. And even if I didn't know Indiana Jones as a franchise, if I started playing the game, like it would still hit for me
yeah,
because the writing is just so good. The characters are just so believable, and the interactions between them are so solid. Like when you have, there's a reporter in the game, spoiler alert, and she's talking to Indiana Jones. Even though the quips that they have back and forth as you're navigating the environment feels so authentic and realistic. Like
right.
I feel like I'm in the movie.
Yeah, it feels like it's a movie translated literally just to a game. Like it's not any different,
Yeah.
right? And then some people say like this truly was like another movie that they're watching. And I think that's interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about the graphics of the game because you've been playing it. How good does it look?
So I also have mixed feelings about the graphics because I'm used to just crazy hyper realistic graphics and just being blown away by them. To me, I thought Hellblade blew away my mind. Horizon blew away my mind. To me, Hellblade's still the best looking game ever, and I know you may not feel the same way, but I really liked how amazing that game looked. So for me, going into Indiana Jones, I think the artistic style doesn't make it look super photorealistic, but it's kind of in this zone where it feels photorealistic, but it's not. And so it's kind of hard because the game looks really, really good, but it doesn't look good in the way that I feel like I've been conditioned to think a good game looks. When
Wow.
you see Crisis, there's a certain way the lighting in that game looks and the character details look and all of those in the animations. And my brain just automatically thinks this is what a good looking game looks like. And maybe this is just my bias because in the last few years, I feel like I've just been playing a ton of Unreal Engine games. And so maybe I'm just used to more of that Unreal Engine look, and I think of that as the best looking game. Now, objectively speaking, I think the game looks fantastic. I really do. And I think the measure of a good game is both what do the characters look like and what does the environment look like. Because so many games,
It
they
can be
can
jarring.
nail one but not the other. And I
Yeah.
feel like the characters are really hard to nail. And so, kind of related to this, like Warhammer, I actually just beat the game. I wanted to talk about that too. To me, the environments look great, the aliens look great, but I don't know if I'm going to get some hate for this. But when I was looking at some of the characters in game and they're talking to each other in game cutscenes, I was like, man, what are these faces? They look like PS3 and Xbox 360 faces. Like, and it's the side characters, right? So I understand you're going to use your budget. It's a double A game.
Yeah.
You're going to focus on the main characters. But I'm like, what in the world is going on with these
And
faces?
that's when it makes it really jarring and kind of takes you out of the
Oh yeah,
experience. And you're like, it's so butt ugly that you're like,
so jarring because you look at these aliens and it's
yeah,
amazing. You're looking at these
and
executions that looks amazing, and then you're just like, my character looks great. Why does this side character
yeah,
delivering dialogue look
yeah.
terrible?
And I think you said it. You hit the nail on the head there. It's a double A game. It was made by I think Saber Interactive. They had a very limited
Yeah.
budget. They didn't expect the game to sell as well as it was
Oh, they
going
did
to.
terrific with what their plan was and what their goal was.
And I think they said in the first month they sold 2 million units. I think at this point it's already at 4 million now.
That's amazing.
And they said they want to support with more content. So like I can't be so harsh on them when the first game did, yes,
Yeah.
push the technical bounds and said, okay, we want to make something just as great. And they still did it. They delivered from their perspective and their budget. They delivered. But you're right. It could have been a little more, how do I say this?
Yeah, I mean, those fine details are like things that really help you know the difference between, okay, what's the
Yeah.
budget of this game? Is it double A? Is it triple A? Because a lot of double A games are hitting so above their weight, right?
Yeah.
That they really feel like the triple A experiences we've come to get used to, right? And, really, how long are you looking at the face of a side character? Like
It's
a
not all-
minute,
it's- yeah.
60 seconds, no big deal.
Especially when they have their helmets on.
Yeah. Most of the time they don't have the helmet. Across the board,
Yeah, it's consistent.
those characters just look great.
Yeah. Well, so to me, again, and this is just me, gameplay has always been king. So if I'm still enjoying the game and getting a lot of enjoyment out of it, I go, you know what? I can sometimes look past it. But I will. The reason why I brought up the graphics portion of it is because I think Indiana Jones was made with id Tech, the same engine that was used to make Doom.
Oh yeah, Doom is gonna look
And-
amazing.
And so yeah, I'm so now hyped for the next Doom game as well. And so looking at Indiana Jones, the fact that it kind of again, it looks like you're watching a film. Like
Yeah.
legitimately, it's like, okay, wow, I can kind of see it.
I feel like Indiana Jones is a game you have to play to
Yeah.
understand, because like we talked about Hellblade being more, I didn't call it a film for a reason because it really did feel like this like digital experience, right? But Jones truly, more so than like any game I remember playing in a long time, made me feel like I'm in a movie, and it just executed that so flawlessly. And look, for people who love Dishonored and for people who like that type of game, right? They're gonna absolutely be in love with this. But for me, that's just never been my type of game. That's just never been my type of gameplay,
No, that's
And
fair.
so I am planning on getting back to Indiana Jones. I think right now I'm kind of in this weird zone where I'm also waiting for Avowed. I kind of have some backlog to go through, but I'm not super excited for anything in particular.
Astrobot.
I have Astrobot, but Astrobot for me is I've had a hard day at work and I just want to chill and play something for half an hour. That's what I'm going to play. I have Stellar Blade, and I tried the first hour of that. It was all right. I think the level design is not the greatest, and I just feel like the hard part for me when it comes to Stellar Blade is it's an objectively very good game, and the gameplay is good, the graphics are good. I am excited to eventually beat the whole game, but after I've played Lies of P, and I've played like Elden Ring, it just doesn't hit the same for me because those games have just put the bar so high. I understand that it's not a Souls like, like in the same way, but it's just after you've had a certain type of gameplay experience, other games just don't have that same luster. And so to me, it's probably going to be like an 8.5 game. I think that's a solid game, but I'm just not as excited to dive right into it.
I think objectively, some of these games are good, the ones that you're talking about. But I think it also depends on when it comes into your life, how you've been looking to play your games. Because when Stellar Blade came out, for most PlayStation fans, there hasn't been that many exclusives last year. So it's like it came
that
out
was
at
kind of
a
a
time.
quiet time because there was Final Fantasy came out, and then other than that, there was a stretch where
there was a stretch where there
people
was
needed
literally-
something to play.
Yeah.
And Rise of the Ronin, I think for a lot of people underperformed.
So I think Stellar Blade kind of really captivated them, and they're like, okay, like so people said this was unique enough that said, hey, the character is somewhat interesting, the story was bland, but they go, okay, somewhat linear, somewhat semi-open, and you go, this is fun, and the action is what's good
Yeah.
about that game. And so again, it hit
And
a
everyone
spot.
loved the eye candy. I
Yeah,
wonder how good the
of
game would have done
course,
without the eye
of
candy.
course. So all of that being said, it came out at a time where if you
Yeah.
were normally just playing 1 or 2 games every year, that's kind of hit the sweet spot for you and give that little itch that you've been, or scratch that itch that you've been looking for. So for you, I think because you have a backlog of games and you're such a savant of so many different types of games in that genre, you're going to be comparing it a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
But that's on my list, and kind of similar to the topic of what you just mentioned. Thinking about Warhammer, I think I was telling you when it comes to the game, I thought it was objectively a very good game, but I think that game just hit at the perfect time because I haven't played Gears in a while. There hasn't been a solid Halo game in a few years. Even if you loved Halo Infinite,
Yeah.
it's been like 3 years, 3.5 years.
Yeah,
No, it's been 3 years.
three,
Yeah,
yeah,
and so it's been a while since you've got that. I feel like that game just took a little bit of multiple
everything.
games and just put it together, right, to create its own identity. Like you had, things from Gears of War.
Yeah,
You had kind of that Halo feel as well.
yeah,
You had melee combat in there, and that kind of made you feel like a hack and slash game or like an Elden Ring or something like that. They
yeah,
kind of just brought all that together. And like to me, like if this game had come in on a year where like there was a really good Halo that came out, or really good Gears, or even remember the back in the days when we had games like Vanquish and like
yeah,
really good, third person shooter, maybe it wouldn't, have hit the same,
yeah,
but for me, because I haven't had that experience in so long, it felt so cozy and
yeah,
it felt nice having that. But to me, like, as much as people were talking about, oh, you have to be kind of nuanced in your strategy when you're fighting the aliens, I really didn't find it that
yeah,
nuanced. I was pretty much doing the same thing for 8 hours, and
yeah,
I enjoyed it. Don't
yeah,
get me wrong, but it didn't have that same level of depth. And I'm
yeah,
sure like the expert players will use that level of depth. But
yeah,
for me, I play every game on hard mode,
yeah.
right? Not the hardest, but hard mode. And for me, I really didn't have to use that much depth to get through.
That's a fair critique. I mean, look, if you got enjoyment out of the game, that's probably. I still haven't touched it, but
Yeah,
just by the looks of it, it's probably gonna be the first Warhammer game that I actually enjoy.
yeah.
I just know it.
I
I
mean,
can
for
tell.
$50, that's what I paid for it, and to finally actually get a good taste of Warhammer,
Yeah,
because I've always wanted to kind of know what the Warhammer universe was about. That
touched
was
it.
a great entry for me, and it did get me kind of more interested in Warhammer. Now, for me, like kind of a critique I have, like versus Halo, I felt like when I was playing Halo, which I feel like a lot of people are going to compare because they're essentially both Space Marines. With
So funny. I
Halo,
didn't actually think about that, but yeah, that's true.
yeah, right. So even Doom, right? Like for those games, like the stakes of the game actually kind of hit a little different because if your protagonist wins, it can have massive consequences across the whole universe,
Yeah,
right? But when it comes to Warhammer, I'm like, man, Warhammer is such a long established, franchise, and there's so many little side stories that are going on. Like, even if we win, what does that really change in the cosmic
right.
sense? It's like we're seeing the day in the life, which is cool in its own way, but it just doesn't hit in the same epic way, right?
Because especially with Warhammer, there's so much pre-established where there's like
Yeah.
gods and
Oh
there's
yeah.
like superhumans and like all these different aliens. It's like you said, what does it really do?
Yeah, and
I may have stopped a bunch of aliens on this planet, but like
yeah, and again, maybe I'll get flack for this, but this is one of the problems I had with Baldur's Gate, and it was hard for me to get through because, look, I put 45 hours into this game. I'm only in Act 2, and the tension doesn't feel like it's really there
mm,
because if all my characters die from these worms, how much has really changed?
yeah,
How much should I care? The whole idea is like you get to make your own character, but I don't really care to make my own character. I'd
yeah,
rather have like a character with personality,
yeah,
right? Because I'm just not into role playing like that. I'd rather have like an interesting character. So if my character dies, why do I care? It's just a blank slate I invented. And if
exactly.
the other characters die too, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of starting to get attached to them, but is that enough to carry me through like 100, 200 hours? And
Yeah,
even if everything goes bad, like there's the Dungeons and Dragons universe is going to exist, and we're just
yeah,
in like one part of the
one part
Dungeons
of
and
it. Yeah,
Dragons universe, and so like it doesn't have that same epicness that I'm looking for in my stories, right?
which is why like sometimes you need to start, finish, and end because now I'm kind of worried that with Warhammer kind of coming live action with Henry Cavill, it's like there's so many stories to tell. You're never gonna get a conclusive ending. Like legitimately, it'll just go on, and then it's gonna be like, what was the point? Is you saved a life or two? You saved a
I
planet?
mean, like
Like
if you have good writers, like you can make us really care, right? And again, like that was kind of one of the critiques I had for Warhammer because there's a book like Save the Cat. And, I don't know if you've ever looked into screenwriting, but it kind of talks to you about like how you can make people fall in love with your character, and kind of building off of that, right? It's kind of similar, but you in order for us to like feel connected to like a story, like there has to be some stakes that matter, and sometimes those have to be personal stakes. Like Last of Us did that really well.
Right.
You had personal stakes, and so even though technically the world didn't change that much, right? I mean, it could have potentially changed a lot if he didn't,
Yeah.
do what he did in the end.
Right.
But that's a hypothetical, right? But truly, from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, right? We invented someone who was a cure, and then we,
Yeah.
stopped that from being a cure. Like we just kind of invented all of this.
Right.
So really, from the objective sense of the world, nothing really changed,
Nothing-
right? But it's still so captivating because you did such a good job of showing that humanity and the what if that just sticks with you. So like there is a way to do that. Like even in Warhammer, right? Like you don't have to have this massive cosmic change for it to just hit different, but you have to be mindful that like this is what the cards I'm dealt with, I have to write around it.
Yeah. So if in Warhammer, again, it's a personal, unique story, a take on a character that's been struggling, and he goes from maybe being a nobody to a hero, and nothing changes again in the cosmic sense, I'm still invested in it because I saw a character grow.
So that's what I mean. Like you can take like different things, from different stories, and some games or stories really you fall in love with them because of how much things change in the cosmic sense, or overall. And other times it's just like, how is this character change? And so like for me, when it came to Warhammer, character kind of changed, but not a ton, And so I am excited to see what Henry Cavill does. I'm definitely going to watch whatever he produces because it's just amazing and fascinating for me to be in new universes that I've never experienced before. Warhammer is so beloved, and there's actually some really crazy, fascinating stuff that's going on in there because you don't get to see a lot of like clashing between like magic and like science, like in the future. And just the whole idea of like essentially the Roman Empire in the future, because that's what we have to do to survive, is really interesting.
Yeah.
But that's one thing you have to tackle in these stories. Like, how do we make people really care when nothing necessarily is changing?
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a fair take. So, yeah, it seems like you've been hitting quite a few games in a really short time span compared to me. So,
yeah. Well, and I know this is another thing we wanted to talk about. I know we are Detroit gamesters, but from our perspective, people who are into gaming are into all sorts of things, whether that's anime, whether that's TV, whether that's books, movies. It's not like we only game. So, I feel like a lot of times what I've seen on gaming podcasts is people will just beat a dead horse. And if there's nothing interesting in the news world, they'll just keep talking about it. And there's a lot of new stuff we could have talked about, like, all these Sony franchises that are, becoming movies, but like, what is there to say? If until it comes out, like,
there's not much.
Not much to say.
You can speculate so much.
You can speculate, but what I'm going to say, I'm excited to see this movie. I hope it's good.
Yeah.
So for us, like, what we were very conscious of going into this is like, we don't want to just become limited to only talking about video games. We just want to talk about the stuff that we think is cool. And so I know I've been gaming heavy, but you've been watching more anime, right? And more TV shows and things like that. So,
yeah, a couple of shows I wanted to talk about, and there's some that you can definitely jump into because you've seen as well. But I actually want to start with the new Penguin show that came out on HBO Max. That's essentially a sequel to the Batman film that just came out by Matt Reeves, directed and written and produced by him. And it's a show about a side character in the first film, Robert Pattinson, and that's the Penguin itself. I think they did a great job with the show because I listened to a couple of interviews by Matt, and they never originally planned to make a show like this. They always thought his character was fascinating, but Colin Farrell bringing life to the character is what kind of set this whole project off. And they're saying, well, wow, he brought so much depth to it. It's not that we just wrote it. It's just his acting brought out a lot of it. And they're like, we want to explore this a little more. And this show is unique because it's about Oswald coming to power post the flood. Spoiler alerts if anyone hasn't seen the Batman film by Matt Reeves. But at the end of it, the Riddler basically sets off a bunch of bombs, and there's a huge flood within Gotham, destroys and kills a bunch of people and destroys a bunch of the city. And so this is post that couple of weeks, and his rise to power. And he has to address Carmine Falcone's family, essentially, because Carmine himself has died in the film, and it's like, who's going to rise next? And it's essentially about his daughter who comes out of Arkham Asylum. So this is a really unique take between two characters because they're like both part of the same coin, but just different sides almost in a sense. And they both struggle because they have a very human aspect
Yeah,
to
it's like a
them.
foil character, and I feel like we've kind of moved away from that. Like we're
Yeah.
having there's characters that have a lot of similarity, but one obviously has something that's very different about them,
Yeah,
and so because of that, that's why we have a difference between the protagonist and the antagonist.
exactly. And they did a great job too because they also showed the human side of both these characters. One was very traumatized in Arkham Asylum. They were,
Which I have some feelings about.
yeah,
Because
your
I do have to say, although I really liked her story arc, right? And I haven't finished the show, so I'm going to finish it
you just like
eventually.
how she looked.
And she's pretty good looking too. But for me, I mean, if that's the only portrayal of mental health and ECT and things like that you see, then it's going to create so much stigma because that is
Yeah.
not like what any of
It's
it
not an
looks like.
accurate
And the
portrayal.
thing is, for a lot of people, that is the only thing that you see. So I 100% get that it's a fictional story to like, hop off, like
Yeah.
let them just kind of create their world, and it's a fictional world. So I can only critique it so much because I understand that this is a superhero place
Yeah.
and there's going to be absurd things that happen. But the problem for me is if people don't experience the real world counterpart, then they're only going to base it off of the superhero thing,
Yeah.
right? And so this actually makes me think of a totally different thing, like an aside. Like I remember I was watching a YouTube video that was talking about, Indian food, or kind of how people feel about India, and how there's a lot of racism that you see towards India as a third world country from people in the West. And one of the things they brought up is in one of the Indiana Jones movies, they're going into like a Maharaja, like a king's
Yeah.
palace, and they're eating scarabs, and everyone, and like a snake. And I get it, like I guess in that movie it's the Temple of Doom movie and they're next to
Yeah.
the Temple of Doom, but like you got to understand, like there are people who have never seen India,
Yeah.
and so like they,
It's
that
the
kind of
same thing.
unconsciously permeates into your
It
mind,
creates a bias.
and it creates a bias, and that's an extreme, don't get me wrong, but my point is, like, if you've never actually seen ECT, if you've never stepped in front of like a into a psych
It's a
unit,
common misconception
then
at that point.
where are you going to pull your information
Yeah.
from? And unconsciously in your mind, those are the images you're going to have. So that was kind of one thing that soured me off of the show a little bit. It was that, and then I'll be honest, it's super basic, but I saw that one week, and then the next week I saw the IGN review for the next episode. I think it was like a 6, and I was like, oh no, I'm not watching this.
Yeah.
But I will say, I did really have a blast in the first 4 or 5 episodes I saw. I really enjoyed it, so I'm
Yeah.
planning on getting back into it eventually.
Yeah, so I think, a couple more things like Oswald's relationship with his mother and Victor, who's this kid he meets who's trying to carjack him and instead takes him in
Yeah.
as someone to mentor. I think was unique too because again it showed that there are so many people that struggle in this world, and I think it's very common to say,
It's super relatable.
yes, very relatable because he's been hurt so much. He's done something really bad as a child. He killed his brothers, and maybe he didn't really mean it at the time, but he made a mistake, and he didn't get a whole lot of grace from anyone, including his mother. And at the very end of his mother dying in this show, he still got a lot of flack. And I think it's
But if you think about it, like that's what the show does so well, and why people like it. Because anytime you have an anti-hero, it's hard to make it like make people care about it. But if
Yeah.
you think about it, he is dealing with issues that everybody is dealing with. How do I deal with an aging mother who has dementia? That's such a relatable thing, right? How do I make a living for the world when everyone wants to put me down and
Yeah.
they're judging me based off of where I come from and what I look like? Such a relatable thing. And then even though if you've seen the show, like it's not like he's an angel and this is why he saves the kid,
Yeah.
but when you see the fact that like there's deeper meaning for why he's saving the kid, him seeing himself in the kid,
Yeah.
right? Those are the moments that the writers were very conscious about, that flesh out that character, make it more believable, and make you fall in love with the character, even though you can tell that this is an evil guy who does evil things.
Well, the point I think they were trying to make was not everyone is perfect. Yes, he's committed crimes, but they had a couple of moments there that were really, really hard hitting. It's like, hey, Victor finally says, I actually might want to get out of this. I want to leave. I have this girl that I'm in love with, and I have a chance to leave Gotham. And as he's trying to leave, Oswald says, go ahead, leave. Everyone's left me. You're no different. I've done so much for you.
Think about how
And-
many different ways that scene could have went down. And if it was like a cliched scene, like the bad guy would be like, no, you're not leaving, screw you, or they'll take the girl and kill her or something like that. We've seen that so many times. But how smart was that? Where it was like, flip it and like leave if you want.
Yeah.
And then you're asking yourself, is this guy like really feeling this way, or is this a mind trick?
Yeah.
And then as a reader, as like a viewer, then you're really engaged because you're like, what's going on here?
And what's crazier is Victor decides to stay and goes, You've shown me so much love, Oswald. I want to be loyal to you. And by the end, Oswald still kills Victor because he goes, "You
What?
are."
Aren't you?
Oh, you haven't seen it?
I didn't
Well,
see the
spoiler
ending.
alert. Sorry, doesn't matter because I'm trying to make a point here, which is he goes, "I still can't trust you." He goes, "You're my weakness. Me loving you, and you've seen my weak side, my human side. You've now become my weakness,
Yeah.
Victor, and because of that, I can no longer have you in my life because you're a liability.
Yeah.
Because you can tell someone how many times I've broken down because of me
Yeah.
loving my mother or what my Achilles heel is now."
But then that makes you, in a way, have like pity for the person, right?
Yeah,
Because you're just
it's
like,
tragic. It's
it's
called
tragic.
tragedy.
It's and that's the story. It's like a tragic hero, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you feel bad for him because it's like, man, because of your actions and what you want out of life, you can't truly find happiness. And look
Yeah.
at, like, if you even have a little bit of happiness, look at what you have to do.
Yeah, and I think this is probably what's going to happen. I think going into the second film, he'll probably have a not a big role, but I think again he gets to a point where it justifies why he's more of a villain than an anti-hero. And honestly, it could have all changed if he had just let Victor in and said, "You can make me a different and better person," but he instead says, "I don't deserve this." And so that's relatable in my life too, because I feel like we've all probably have had
Yeah.
experiences. I hate to generalize, but like we've met probably someone so great in our lives and said, maybe we don't deserve that person, and I'm going to continue doing me and trying to learn on my own because
Well, so
I've made
like
so many mistakes.
when I think about, like, mental health and how it kind of correlates with the show, it's so interesting. Like, to me, like, they didn't really have the greatest depiction of what an insane asylum
Sure.
like looks like in the present day. Maybe in their world it makes sense. But what you're talking about, that's so beautifully executed, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
talking about someone's self-image and how
Yeah.
really, like, you keep yourself down, right? And maybe he has some low-lying depression, and that's why he
That's
feels so
exactly.
guilty, and that's why he's always punishing himself, or some survivor's guilt and things like that, right? And that's why really he's really being his worst enemy, because he's not allowing himself to really
Find
forgive
happiness.
and move on and
Yeah.
find happiness and all those things. It's so beautifully executed. It's all about showing and not telling too, right?
Yeah,
And those are all
exactly.
things that you can understand without him going, on a monologue and explaining it all.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing too. And I think what's unique about it is like it can take a long time to gain someone's trust. And I think that's what they show throughout this whole season is Victor gaining Oswald's trust. But you can also break it within a matter of seconds. And again, it's so relatable. It's
Yeah.
like that is what you see in the real world often. And
But
so
that's what I love about those writers for that show. Like, really, they had a lot of confidence because it was a slow burn.
yeah, it was a
And I
slow,
feel
very
like
slow burn.
with all of the dopamine rushes we get in, like, modern television,
Yeah.
to make something consciously, that's a lot slower to get into, and that builds characters. A lot of times you don't see people like spending that same time, and I'm a victim of this as well, like actually trying to build characters, because
Yeah.
you're just trying to get them moving forward in the plot to like where you want them to be, as opposed to building the characters, and then you understand why the plot is moving forward, because that's what those characters are going to do in
Yeah.
those scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it becomes too predictable. And so, once I finished the show, I was like, you know what? I really want to give the first Batman film another chance because it really wasn't my cup of tea. I think The Dark Knight with Christian Bale was something I enjoyed a little
Yeah, why do you
more.
think you didn't like it as much the first time? Was it because, like, I mean, for me personally, going into the Batman, I love the Dark Knight trilogy so much, and it's been such a huge inspiration to me. I was like, why would you ever spoil the name of the Dark Knight? Like, that was
Yeah.
so good. Why? And so I had a huge bias against the movie going in. I had a huge bias against Robert Pattinson, and he just friggin' delivered to me, and I loved it. Maybe again because I underestimated the movie. That's why overperformed so much for me. But I've always been curious, how come you didn't like it at all?
I don't think I understood the world so well. I think, in a 2.5 hour film, you already have a pre established Batman. He's not his first year. It's not like him becoming Batman. And I think him like constantly going back and forth to this club, going to Oswald, trying to figure out these clues. And I think it
Did
was
it, like, not feel like a Batman movie for you?
yeah, it didn't. But this is somewhat. I'm not saying this is a unique take on Batman because Batman is also somewhat of a detective, even in the
Oh, yeah.
cartoon shows and the comics and stuff. But I'm not used to that image because my version of Batman was never.
Yeah, you have like an established image of what he's like. We talked about like audience expectations, right? And so like we expect a certain thing out of a superhero, and when you're basically getting like almost like a David
Complete-
Fincher,
yeah.
or like a kind of like a thriller type of
Exactly.
movie, that's
Then
like
it's like complete, and it was critically acclaimed, and so it's not a bad film at all. But when I saw this show and I got a better understanding of the world building, and I watched it again, I was like, wow, I actually really love this Batman in this world because now it does connect with Oswald and like what Oswald's trying to do.
Yeah.
And you have this Batman that's like struggling because this world is full of crime. It's so hard to be a hero in this world
And it's
because
interesting because like all the other Batman movies we've seen, he's already formulated the idea of Batman and what Batman means as a hero. But in this one, he's only called himself Vengeance. I'm
vengeance.
Vengeance. He doesn't say I'm
Yeah,
Batman.
it doesn't
I'm
say Batman.
Vengeance. And
And
so it's like interesting that that's the character arc where it's he's going from I'm Vengeance to I'm Batman.
well, he's also struggling just like Oswald. So it's not just Oswald that's having the problem because in the prior films, Batman saves everyone all the time. And even though, yeah, and maybe the second film, the love interest dies
Yeah.
and stuff, but at the end of the day, he's saving the mask,
Yeah, and
right?
he's still like the hero you expect, like the
Yeah,
idolized hero, right?
yeah. But with this, Batman's still struggling. Goes, I don't know who my father was. I don't know why my family had
Yeah,
this weird stigma attached to them,
yeah,
and
he's like
now
a
I
little
get
more
it.
unhinged.
He's more unhinged, and he goes, I'm struggling just like the villains are struggling in this show, and that's what makes it unique. Is that everyone has this like it's an interesting take on all the characters. Either you're a hero or you're a villain, but you don't know your true identity.
Yeah, it's like the first Batman from Tim Burton is like, Batman's a little theatrical, and this one it's like, yeah, Batman in this world would be a little deranged,
Yeah,
and so he
exactly.
finds his way.
So yeah, I really really enjoyed the show. I now enjoy the movie more, and I'm more excited for the second film. Unfortunately, it was just delayed again another year, so 2027. But I think filming starts this year, so I don't know why they're taking so long to release it. But it'll be interesting to see how this Batman film compares to the Brave and Bold Batman film that James Gunn ultimately ends up producing, because there's going to be
Yeah,
potentially two versions of Batman now.
yeah. So much to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
So I think even though I didn't finish it, that was probably one of the best shows I watched last year. I'm trying to think what else came out last year. I know I really liked the Fallout TV show. I feel like it's been so long that I can't really go into the specifics of what the story was like.
Yeah, that's
But I do remember really enjoying that show when it came out. So I think those were pretty much. I don't think Shogun came out last year. I think that was the year
it was the
before.
year just prior. I think yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
the year prior.
But other than that, I don't think any TV show really hit for me. Right?
That's fair. I mean, I've been watching some anime, and Dragon Ball Daima's been kind of on the forefront of my mind, and
Are you caught up with Daima?
I'm caught up. There's been some unique things in there. They've extended and added to the lore, and it's very Toriyama like to do it. And he ended up coming up with this idea just before he passed away. So it started production 2022. I think Toriyama just passed early last year or end of 2023. And so at least the show got produced with his thoughts in mind on it. So it's not like someone else came up with the idea. It's actually adding to the lore, and I can see how this extends to potentially Dragon Ball Super in the future. But what I don't like is that it does seem very kiddie. Like there's some unique takes where Vegeta ascends and gets Super Saiyan 3, and it's like that was so cool. But as a kid, and it lasts for maybe a minute and a half, and
Yeah,
it's
so it doesn't hit the same because
doesn't
like
hit the
we've always
same.
wanted to see that with adult Vegeta, and it's like we
Yeah.
kind of get a little bit, but
Yeah.
like not
Well,
completely.
we wanted to see a full arc with it. Like when Vegeta obtains Majin Vegeta and becomes Super Saiyan 2,
Oh yeah,
there's a real reason for it. He had such a hard time training, he couldn't obtain it on his own. And when he gets it, he struggles between being a good or bad person and killing people
yeah,
versus, you know, giving in to his urges versus being a father. But getting Super Saiyan 3 now means nothing here. It literally meant nothing.
yeah. That's a good point. I never thought about it. I feel like Dragon Ball has been like the precursor for so much of anime as well. But yeah, in Dragon Ball Z, people really had to work for their level ups, and it
Yeah.
was like you had so much stress that was put on you and so much responsibility, and you rose to the occasion because you had to, and you had to do something dramatic, like
Yeah.
whether that was like go in the time chamber and just go
Yeah.
crazy, or go to another planet, learn a new technique or
Right.
something like that. It didn't actually just feel like something
Exactly. And
pulling out
and,
of nowhere.
and Vegeta struggles so much, he literally couldn't obtain Super Saiyan 2, but all of a sudden he obtained Super Saiyan 3 in less than a year because he saw Goku do it. To me, that's a cop out.
And think about how hard he had to work to achieve Super Saiyan 2 and like
Yeah,
Ascended Super Saiyan, how angry he was that he couldn't keep up. And,
exactly.
all of a sudden it's like, all right, now I caught
Yeah.
up.
And that's why I think in the latest iterations of Dragon Ball in the last 5 years, it's all been more fan service than actual depth. And so, again, while I want more and more Dragon Ball coming out,
Yeah.
I'm in love with it. It's been my childhood favorite series of all time. I just think that it's not what it once was. And it's now unfortunate that Toriyama has passed away. Rest in peace. But his prodigy who potentially takes over, like, we don't know how it's going to continue going forward. I don't know if it's going to be the same anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want the same anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. For me, I'm not as far along in Dragon Ball Daima as you. I've probably seen like the first few episodes. I haven't got to the point where they fight the whatever that big robot thing
The
is.
Tamagamis.
The Tamagami. Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. Um, I was enjoying it. I liked the fact that I felt like they did a better job with their exposition and like their world building.
Yeah.
And I feel like as time has went on, probably the writers have noticed that like there's a lot of inconsistencies,
Yeah.
and I feel like they've been trying to put in more effort to address some of those
Yeah,
inconsistencies. Like even with that Dragon Ball superhero or whatever, I feel like they actually spend a lot more time on exposition on like, okay, how does this person just catch up out of nowhere? Like,
Yeah.
how does these Dragon Balls work? How does this and that work?
Yeah.
And I was actually surprised with Daima how well they did that while
Yeah, they
still
put some thought in
pushing the
there.
narrative forward. I remember watching the episode with the Minotaur, and even though it was kind of a throwaway episode, it didn't feel like a throwaway episode
Yeah.
because things were happening, and he was fighting that character, and
Super
you're
Saiyan for
learning
the first
the
time.
power levels and all those type of things. So it was still fascinating, but really how much actually changed. And so I had a good experience with it, but after a while I just stopped watching because for me that forward driving momentum really wasn't there as much,
Yeah.
because I was like there really isn't that tension, and
Yeah.
really like for a story to propel you forward with good pacing you need good tension. And for
Yeah.
me I was just like, yeah, I know Goku is going to get strong enough and it's going to beat this character and then to go to another character. So that's why maybe it felt like more fan service, because I'm
Yeah.
like the world is getting enriched and it's like cool,
Yeah.
but I'm not really like at the edge of my seat.
Exactly. And this is also a limited series, so I think there's potentially only maybe 20 episodes in total, which means not a whole lot can happen.
Yeah.
It's predictable. We know what's going to happen. And honestly, it's only worth watching the big moments now, like on Instagram.
So that's
or
what I've been
TikTok.
doing. I've been just kind of keeping up with the big moments. I mean, overall, like when I first heard about Daima, I really was not excited for it at all because I've just never been into like the mini character thing. Like I remember Gundam did it. I was like, I'm just like not into this at all.
Yeah.
But the first few episodes of Dragon Daima definitely hit for me
Yeah.
way better than I anticipated.
Same.
I was actually like really hyped, and I think we were talking like, last year was pretty good for anime, I feel, because
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything that just like was an absolute breakaway success for me, but Dragon Ball Daima to me overperformed,
Yeah, I think-
overall. But
yeah.
I can see like how now it's kind of like wondering, I don't know how this is
slow
going to
down.
turn out. So that was pretty good. I know you like, was it Terminator Zero? I haven't
So,
seen that one.
It's akin to like Cyberpunk Edge Runners or whatever that show is called. That it added a lot to the lore, and I think what was unique about this anime specifically was it's almost canonical. Like they didn't really retcon a whole lot, and it was so unique that they took a take or a spin on AI in the modern sense. They added a lot and said, "Hey, here's a new family, a new set of kids," and you have that same type of setup where it's like, hey, someone's going back in the past to alter the potential future to say, can we either stop the war or can we extend it so that way humans get erased from all of humanity or whatever. But the way they addressed it, again, it was super unique. And I think this is how you extend well-known IP. You don't have to constantly do live action films because it's like the likeliness. Whenever you cast a new actor for a live action film that you're remaking, you go, oh, they'll never be able to live up to the original actors. It's
hard to fill.
It's very hard to do. But when you do an anime or an animation or a cartoon, no one thinks about that.
Yeah, because you have kind of like a disconnect in your mind.
Exactly, disconnect, and then you have lower expectations. So then normally it can kind of surpass and exceed those. I feel like sometimes they have the opportunity.
I wonder if that's going to be just like the thing people do. Like Lord of the Rings tried it out. I bet you Harry Potter is going to try it out at one point.
And normally it's cheaper to go that route. And honestly, if you have a huge success,
unless you're Arcane,
you spent 200 and some million, which was insane. But maybe it still might end up helping the brand rather than hurting it. Like, they might not make it.
Well, I feel like Terminator just hasn't been hitting the same for a while now. Like we all know Skynet, like it's like a thing we all talk about, but in the last 5 to 10 years, like how much is really going on with that franchise?
Yeah, exactly. And it's more relevant now than ever because AI has become so prevalent in our lives.
Now's the time.
So the question in this series specifically is a new scientist creates another AI program similar akin to Skynet, but he doesn't know that if he brings it online, will it help Skynet kill all of humans or will it help keep them alive and destroy Skynet?
That's a good ethical dilemma.
It was a very ethical dilemma. It was very unique.
And don't ruin it for me.
I won't ruin it, but it takes them the entire series to figure out what to do. And even then, at the end, it's still not conclusive. It's open-ended.
Do you think there'll be a season 2, or did it end in like the way Cowboy Bebop ends? And you're like, okay, it's an inconclusive ending, but it's a conclusive ending.
It's conclusive enough that you could just say it could be a potential... How do I say this? You can open
If they
it
wanted to,
if
they
they wanted
could,
to,
but
they
they don't
could,
need to.
but they don't need to.
So like it feels like it was cathartic for you. Like it
It was
hit the
cathartic.
spot, but they never choose to do something else. You're fine
Yes,
with
I'm
it.
fine with it.
Maybe I'll check it out. I know you've been telling me to watch Terminator Zero for
Yeah,
a while.
it's great. It's
I don't
great.
know. Like, I feel like some of the animes on Netflix, like, even though they get a lot of hype, I just couldn't get into them. Like, I remember,
Yeah,
even though I really love Dragon Age, I couldn't get into the anime
I couldn't
completely.
either.
I tried to get into, I think there's a Dragon's Dogma anime.
Yeah,
I couldn't get into that the same. So that's why I'm always a little
there's a
hesitant.
Tekken anime that's
Yeah,
just
and
not.
I feel like there have been animes on Netflix that have really hit well. Like I know we wanted to talk about Pluto too
Yeah,
because that's one of our favorites. But other animes, they just really haven't hit. Like I remember there
yeah,
was Blood and Zeus, and like
yeah. I
that was kind of
haven't.
okay, but eh.
And I think at least with Terminator again, just to kind of go back to this, consistent animations, voice acting is great, music is very unique, and then they mix a little bit of CGI, and they go, okay, again, I see why people are going towards this now. It just kind of makes sense in this overall arching thing because certain moments like really require it now, and it's like this is great. You're not flexing it too hard. This is perfect. So I think they find a really unique balance. It's like a solid 8 out of 10 for me, and it
I'll
was
take that.
yeah, and it's short enough that you can finish it in one sitting. 8 episodes, 20 minutes each. You're only getting what like 3 hours in total.
I think I'm gonna be a little basic as well, and I really need to stop doing this. But I think IGN gave Terminator Zero 7 out of 10. I was just like,
Uh,
ooh, I don't know, I don't
I
know.
but they also said if you actually read the review, that's your problem.
I'm basic. I'll
If
be
you
honest when it comes
if
to this.
if you read it, they also said it was one of the most unique and best stories in the Terminator franchise
Okay.
since Terminator 2.
Maybe I'll check it out. Maybe it'll inspire me a
I
little
think it
bit.
will, and I think especially with the way you write, this
As soon as you start saying AI, I was like, man, I hope it's not stealing my AI idea because that would kill the story I'm working on.
is
So,
very unique, man. That's what I'll say. So, and at the end, they actually have a little moment that's like kind of like a shocking, not a twist, but it's like
okay.
wow. Like again, I wasn't like on the edge of my seat all the time, but I'm like, this had me hooked. And
Yeah.
that's a good anime. When it
Oh,
has
yeah.
you hooked, it's like it's like it's worth watching.
All right. I'll check it out. And now I know, kind of talking about anime in general and what we've liked in the last year, have you been able to watch any of Dan Da Dan on your own yet?
I have not, but what I have watched, what I'm addicted to right now, is that stupid opening.
I listened to the American version of
The
that
English
opening,
cover.
the English cover,
It's
and
isn't it better than the original?
I still like the original better, but it's
Wow,
good. It's good. They're both good in their own way, but man, and it's so funny. My niece, who's like I think 2 or 3, like she's dancing to it. It's
that's so
so
funny.
catchy. They killed it with the opening
They,
song.
and it's made by a band that's called Creepy Nuts.
That's so funny.
That's so hilarious.
But tell me, have you watched any of the episodes yet?
No, so what I am gonna do is they just announced that they're working on season 2, and they already have a teaser trailer. I think coming out next year. I'm gonna wait till season 2 comes out and then binge.
You always say you're gonna do this.
This is my plan. Like Bleach, I'm waiting for all 4 seasons.
All
So
right,
I
that's
can
fair.
binge.
That's fair. I'm doing the same thing for Bleach as well
Yeah,
because I have Hulu with ads, and I don't want to deal with the ads. And
exactly,
I'll fast forward through the parts where I kind of
exactly.
filler, and I'll see all the good fights. That's my plan for that as well. Well, I can tell you about my experience with Down. So I didn't really expect much at all going into it, and that first episode just hits. And I feel like what Dun to Dun does really well is it kind of fuses a lot of different things that we see that are really popular in anime together, but also the twist to it is that they take the raunchiness, but they just make it really funny, and it just hits so well at that specific type of humor. And I feel like sometimes that type of Japanese humor that's a little raunchy doesn't always hit for me, but in Don to Don, it just totally hits so well.
Yeah,
So, like for instance, like I kind of get some like Fooly Cooly vibes with how the fact that there's like a female character and a male character, but both of them have a lot of agency in the story, and they both are a lot of making a lot of differences. So I think that hit really really well. It has your traditional like high school falling in love story, right? And they follow all of the kind of templates for that pretty well, and so that it hits on that level as well. It has kind of the whole shonen like let's power up and fight people, that hits really well. And it really has just like frenetic energy in the first episode where like it goes from one ridiculous thing to another ridiculous thing, and then right when you think it's gotten ridiculous enough, it goes to the next ridiculous thing, and then the next few episodes it finds a way of dialing that back, actually having a good story with good character development between the main characters. And so that to me was like expertly done. They had like running jokes that were hilarious. I will say, my wife's not a fan because there's a lot of just really awkward, inappropriate scenes that
sure.
happen around balls in that anime, which is just so absolutely funny.
Uh,
But
honestly, if you didn't tell me that the show you were describing was Dandadan, I would have said you're describing Mob Psycho. Honestly, if you love this show, you will absolutely love Mob Psycho because it's
I don't
literally
know.
the
So
same
so
thing.
I'll tell you what my problem is with Don and why I'm not super hyped for the next season, even though I love the first 3 episodes. And I don't know. I watched a little bit of Mob Psycho and I couldn't finish the first episode because for me, like, I have seen too many of the training animes, too much of the power up animes, and I'm just kind of sick of it, and I just can't get into it anymore. And then for me, at a certain point, like, Don was just hitting those notes, like, okay, we need our characters to power up and we need to have random fight scenes. So let's bring back, these enemies and those enemies. And I found myself kind of forwarding through it because I was like, essentially, these 20 minutes are just let's fight a random enemy and then the next episode we'll move on to a different enemy. And I was like, oh, this is so boring for me. Like, it's not really doing much. And then it started really like kind of fitting the cliches too much of like, awkward man, awkward, girl to a certain extent, and they're just kind of dancing around the fact that they're falling in love. And so I was like, okay, I've seen this so many times in anime. And so I feel like with Kaiju as well, that show,
Number eight.
that came out, same type of feeling I had where, they know kind of the tropes of the shonen anime and they kind of inverted it a little bit in the beginning, but then later they revert into those same exact tropes. And so that's why the last couple episodes of that season just really dragged for me. And there were some new side characters they introduced, and they didn't exactly fit the mold of your traditional Japanese anime character. And so I like that. There was one episode in particular about a ballerina, and man, that was one of the best episodes of anime I've seen for a while. That hit me hard emotionally. That was amazing. Like 10 out of 10 episode. But really, the last few episodes was a drag. I thought the show ended at such a weird portion part, and a lot of these animes, I feel like now instead of giving us that 26 episode season, they're doing like I think they're called cours.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like 12 episodes. It just ends in an awkward spot.
Yeah, that's true. And it's the norm was 26 like 5 to 10
Oh
or
yeah,
15 years ago, but this is a way to kind of like hype up the engagement a little bit to say we're going to keep you on a cliffhanger.
yeah.
We know we're stopping at an awkward spot, but there's more to come, and then we can wait another 1 or 2 years to actually do an actual second season.
Yeah, but I feel like for this one, really, it was just an awkward spot for it to end. So to me, like when I watched the first few episodes, like man, like maybe not everyone's gonna feel this way, but this is like a 9 show for me. And like the last 3 episodes were like a 6. Like they
Which
were
is fine.
hard to watch.
You're not gonna ever find a consistent shonen anime that's so good across the board every episode.
It's been hard for me to like find a good shonen anime like that. Like I know even with Jujutsu Kaisen, like I know there's a lot of lovers of Jujutsu Kaisen, but for
Even
a while that had its ups and downs too. It's been really a long time since I've seen an anime like that that's hit hard. I maybe you would classify Attack on Titan in the same realm, but that's really that hit well, and think about how much time they had to take off, so it wasn't so much bloat, like really it was just like concentrated into the point.
Yeah, that took way too long. So you're right. There's just not even My Hero to a certain extent dragged for so long. There's so many.
Yeah, I went on for such a long time. I mean, I was so hyped on My Hero, and then I'll never forget there was a few episodes that had the gentle villain.
Yeah,
I couldn't watch after that. And I know I've been really wanting to get back into My Hero,
the
but
show ends next
it
year.
dragged so much with that part.
The show finally ends next year, and I'm hyped that it's finally ending. But the animations aren't as good as I thought it was going to be.
Do you feel like the quality went down? Because I remember the first 2 seasons had some amazing fights.
Amazing, and then it went down, and I hope that they go all out with the budget on the final season because it's the final freaking season. Yeah. But if not, it's just
probably will. I mean, look at Bleach. Like, look at how those. I mean, the animations are just right.
It took 10 years to come back with that. Now, granted, Bleach was the highest rated anime this season, which was great to see. Every episode was over a 9.
I'm kind of having mixed feelings about like the rating system now because again, maybe people will hate me for this, but Solo Leveling just came out with a new season, and I haven't seen the first episode, but like I think it got like a 9.9.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to hate on something I haven't seen yet, so I really have no idea how good that second, the first episode of the second season is, but I don't know. 9.9 is like crazy high for an anime episode,
especially because the first season, in terms of animation quality, was a letdown, in my opinion.
I thought it was pretty good.
I didn't think it was good. I think it was okay. They only had 2 to 3 great episodes, and the rest were subpar. And that's not the feeling I got when I read the manhwa. When I read the manhwa, every chapter was so on point, and I was reading a comic. But it didn't translate well in animation in that first season. So I can definitely tell the difference. And they kind of flopped. They didn't put as much into it, and they knew how popular the series was. And I'm like, you couldn't have invested. And they did a thing where they were being very cautious and they wanted to know if it was going to be popular. And
Yeah.
I think I'm betting you season 2 will be more consistent.
Oh yeah. I mean, I guess like because I didn't have the experience reading, anything about it. Like for me, just going into it, not expecting much from the show, I was like, man, this is pretty
Shereen,
good to me.
when I tell you that I read a comic that had me so excited, I couldn't stop reading it. I was literally 5 in the morning, from midnight to 5 in the morning, reading like 50 chapters a day. That's how crazy this evoked this emotion for me from a comic.
Wow.
And because every panel jumped out to me, it was amazing.
Yeah, so I guess like the bar was really high
It
for
was
you,
so
and so when
high.
you saw it in animation, you were just like, I mean, I would imagine season two probably stepped it up a lot because I was hearing that from my cousin that like he felt like the first episode like it was sick, and
So
he
they,
felt like the animations were good and everything.
so that's the thing. They got some really popular artists to make the opening and ending song now. The episode 1 seems to be really high quality. They're going to cover some really great arcs in this new season. So I think my hope, again, I'm being cautious about this, is that it's going to be way better. And they've learned from season 1. So excited for it for sure.
Okay, cool. So I know we've been going on for a while now, so maybe we can talk about what we're looking, forward to in 2025. And we've been touching upon this, throughout the whole, podcast. And maybe for our next episode, we're going to delve more into it and we'll pick out specifically why we're super excited for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are the top games or top animes or movies you're looking forward to in this year?
I mean, let's see. In terms of maybe shows, there's actually a lot of movies coming out this year. And I remember seeing a list, and it's a lot of sequels to old movies coming out this year specifically. And I don't have the list on hand, but I'm excited for just a bunch of movies. I'm excited for the Switch 2 and all its software being released. I'm
And
excited kind of for Death Stranding 2.
really,
Ghost
because
of
you
Yotei
didn't
not
even
as
play the
much.
first one.
I wasn't, but that trailer that Hideo kind of trailer made me so hyped.
Was it the graphics?
It wasn't the graphics. It was the stupidity of the trailer of someone having a guitar and being able to fight with a freaking guitar.
So
This
it
is
was
the
just
coolest
how
thing.
ridiculous it
It was
was.
how ridiculous and how hyped that got me. So I'm like, okay, you know what? Even though this game is about delivering Amazon packages and UPS and FedEx packages, I actually think there's some potential for the sequel because now you might actually have a competitor to Amazon in this game, and it's
All
like,
right, all
bro,
right.
like, let's go
I actually don't
USPS.
think I finished the whole trailer for it because I remember I played like 40 to 50% of Death Stranding and I enjoyed my time with it. But after a certain point, I was like, man, I do not want to feel like I'm working a second job. So then I stopped playing
Which
it.
is fair. I can't blame yourself for
I
that.
didn't expect you to say you were hyped for
I'm
Death Stranding too.
Yeah.
So okay.
Metal Gear Solid Delta. I'm excited for that. I'm not as excited for Ghost of Yotei. Just this hasn't been on my radar really as much. I didn't play the first one yet, and I'm just like Assassin's Creed has my attention more. And then honestly, I'm kind of looking to see if Xbox decides they have so many games releasing this year, but what did they announce by the end of the year? Are they going to announce new hardware plans? That actually has me somewhat excited.
Or what's coming out in 2026 because they got some potential bangers coming out in 2026.
Well, it's the pivot now. This is the realization that they've been trying to tell all their fans since 2015. Like, we got games. It's finally coming to fruition now.
Oh yeah.
So I'm hyped for this year because you're going to actually deliver products like Fable, potentially South of Midnight,
Yeah.
and a bunch of other games.
So speaking of which, and I'm not going to be the person who's like, oh, this is a year for Xbox because actually I've been enjoying my Xbox year, my games for the last couple of years, but I am really looking forward to a lot of these Xbox exclusives. Like definitely, I think top of the list for me is Fable. I've only dabbled a little bit in the first few, but I am super excited for that one. I'm excited for Avowed. I'm kind of excited for South of Midnight as well, but not as much. But really, I would say Avowed and Fable, I'm super hyped for. I don't really know what Sony's going to be bringing out yet. We have to see if Wolverine comes out. I'm going to be hyped for that. But, you know, I mean, Ghost of Yotei 2, I think it'll be a great game, but I don't have that same enthusiasm. Metroid, I'm super excited for. That's going to be a big one for me. Some of the third-party stuff, like I'm actually really excited for. Obviously, if Grand Theft Auto 6 actually comes out, that's going to be amazing. Mafia kind of snuck up for me, so I'm kind of really looking forward to that one as well. And then, really we're just going to see how the year goes. Other than that, like movies and anime wise, I don't really know too many that I'm super excited for. I've never really been into Superman like that. Like out of all the superheroes, he's like really not been my superhero. But I am really looking forward to somebody potentially doing what Christopher Nolan did with Batman, potentially with Superman. And from the real Superman fans, it seems like he's nailing the right notes,
Yeah,
from
based
the
off that
trailer.
trailer.
Yeah, so that I'm surprised at how much I'm looking forward to that. I am kind of looking forward to the new Jurassic. I think that'll be kind of cool. Anime wise, I don't think there's really much.
Yeah, there's nothing too excited on an anime front other than the last cour of Bleach, which I think is supposed to come out at the end of this year.
Yeah, that's gonna be hype. Like to see those last battles, that's gonna be hype.
And you know for sure they're making changes because the author of the manga, he's been helping produce all the seasons, so I'm sure they're going to change up the ending a little bit. So I'm excited to see how they finally end it. You know,
So, all right, guys. Well, I think that will be a wrap for this episode, and tune in 2 weeks probably, and we'll be talking more about some of the news and kind of going through 2025 in more depth.
take care.
All right, peace.